Chapter 508. How did you know? The squirrel demon answered subconsciously, then reacted and looked at him with wide eyes, panicking. You. It stuttered for a long time but did not get an answer. Tears gathered in its eyes and it looked like it was about to cry. After a while, it asked carefully with a sobbing voice, "Do you want to buy mushrooms?" The three of them. Such bad acting skills, which school did he graduate from? It did not give up and handed 2 mushrooms, one red and one white, to Lone Moon. "Just buy a pair, okay? Or I can give it to you." Seeing that they did not take it, it panicked and immediately took the whole basket. "I'll give you all the white ones, I took a long time to pick them. Just buy one red one, okay?" "No." He directly revealed his identity. "You're a demon, right?" How did you know?" The squirrel stiffened, a trace of panic flashed in its eyes, but it still held the basket stubbornly. "Then do you want to buy mushrooms?" "No." Was this a retard? It did not forget to sell mushrooms at this time. The squirrel became even more anxious and turned to hand the basket to Shining. "Do you want to buy one?" Shining looked down. "I don't want vegetables." It could only raise it to chef. I don't make vegetables." The squirrel's face turned pale as if the sky had fallen. The blue chest in its hand loosened, and immediately the mushrooms fell to the ground. The whole demon did not feel good. It sat directly on the ground and broke down crying. There's no time, why doesn't anyone buy my mushrooms? Little Flower will be eaten. It's all my fault, I can't save her, It howled in grief and tears streamed down its face like beans. Its originally short body shrunk into a ball, and its large tail slapped the ground again and again. It did not even care about hiding its identity now. It let its hat fall, revealing 2 drooping triangular ears. Shining, I Ching, Lone Moon, the demons of this plane were like this? Why did they have a sense of guilt like bullying a child? "Don't cry." Lone Moon had a headache and couldn't help but say, "I want to cry." It howled even louder, "Little Flower is going to be eaten, it's all my fault. I hurt her." What Little Flower? Hey, if you cry again I'll take care of you." Is this a child? Accept me. Anyway, Little Flower is gone, and I don't want to live anymore. Holy shit, is this little demon addicted to crying? Just as he was about to conjure a hand seal, Shining stepped forward and stuffed the fruit into his mouth. As soon as the crying stopped, the world fell silent. "Mushroom, who wants to eat your Little Flower?" Shining squatted down and asked. The squirrel demon was stunned and looked at her with teary eyes. Holding the fruit in his mouth with both hands, he replied pitifully, "I'm a squirrel, not a mushroom." After saying that, he did not forget to hold the fruit in his hands and bite into it while sniffing and answering, It's the Tiger King. He caught Little Flower." There were other demons here. "Who is Little Flower?" Shining continued to ask. "Little Flower is my best friend." The squirrel nodded as if emphasizing. "She's like you, she will give me delicious food. When I was still a little squirrel, I lived on the tree next to her house. She would give me a big pine nut every day. He's so good looking. I look just like him now." Lone Moon was stunned. He took a look at its incomplete form. That Little Flower was a human? But later, she was caught by the Tiger King. It looked sad again. The Tiger King said that if I could bring other people back to him, he would return Little Flower to me. I waited here every day, but those people were afraid of me and refused to go back with me. So, I wanted to use mushrooms. Yesterday the Tiger King said that if I didn't bring people back, he would eat Little Flower. The more it spoke, the softer its voice became and its head drooped lower and lower. Finally it looked at them, unwilling to give up. "You really don't intend to buy a mushroom? You've already said your purpose, who would buy it? All right, bring us to that tiger demon." Lone Moon said directly. "We'll help you save Little Flower." If he guessed correctly, that tiger demon was the one that had been causing trouble in the town recently. And this squirrel didn't have any bloody resentment on it. It seemed that it had never harmed anyone. The Little Flower he was talking about should also be a human. Really? Its eyes lit up and then darkened again. But the Tiger King is very powerful. Lone Moon couldn't be bothered to explain to it. He directly picked it up with one hand and flew up on his sword. "Where?" The squirrel was startled and quickly hugged its tail, then weakly pointed to the right. The few of them flew in the direction pointed by the squirrel. The tiger demon's lair wasn't far. They arrived in less than 2 minutes. Before they got close, they smelled a strong bloody smell from afar. It even overshadowed the demonic aura that wasn't very strong. Lone Moon looked at the cave entrance that emitted an unpleasant stench, frowned and walked in. The squirrel was already scared out of its wits. It slipped to the back, thought about it and turned to hide behind Shining. Those who gave it fruits were all good people. Once they entered the cave, the bloody smell inside was even stronger and even a little choking. There was a faint cracking sound under their feet. I Ching turned his hand and summoned a ball of fire. It instantly lit up the cave. The cave wasn't very big and one could see everything at a glance. The tiger demon wasn't in the cave. The whole cave was filled with bones of all kinds of beasts but more of humans. Some had become white bones and some still had flesh and blood, emitting waves of stench. Great, the Tiger King isn't here. The squirrel looked happy. He rushed out in an instant and began to search in the cave. Little Flower, where's Little Flower? I'm here to save you, Little Flower. It shouted for a long time but there was no response. It began to search in a panic and even began to pick up the bones on the ground. Lone Moon frowned, grabbed the squirrel demon and dragged it out. Let's go out first. No, I want to save Little Flower. The squirrel struggled but was still dragged out. Let me go. There's no living person inside. Lone Moon glared at it and sighed. How long has your Little Flower been caught? The squirrel was stunned and then counted with his fingers. 4, 5, 6. I don't know. But the Tiger King promised to let me exchange for her. She's long dead. Looking at the situation in the cave, the tiger demon wouldn't leave anyone alive at all. It was just lying to this squirrel. Chapter 509. No, it can't be. The color drained from the squirrel's face, and the tears in his eyes began to gather again. The tiger demon clearly said that it can be changed back before the sun rises, clearly. Seeing that it was about to start howling again, Lone Moon was quick to react and stuffed a fruit into its mouth. Demons were good demons but they were too noisy. I say, little mushroom, you. He was just about to say a few words when he suddenly felt a burst of demonic aura coming from the left side of the forest. It's in the direction of the town. I Ching reminded. Go back. Lone Moon picked up the squirrel demon, turned around and flew in that direction on his sword. Before he got close, he heard a loud bang and there were faint cries of horror. Outside the town wall, a huge tiger suddenly appeared, and it looked like it was already at the 5th level. Its original body was about the same height as the city wall, and at this time, it was using its front claws to attack the thick city wall. For a moment, large pieces of bricks fell to the ground, and it looked like the city wall was about to collapse. Tiger King. The squirrel recognized it at one glance and his body trembled. Lone Moon's eyes darkened, saving them the trouble of looking for it. Chef, it's time to advertise. I Ching nodded and was about to summon his sword. Forget it, I'll go. Lone Moon suddenly changed his mind and casually threw the squirrel to him. If you go, you'll definitely be finished with one sword again. Advertisements and whatnot, of course, the more gorgeous, high-end and shocking the better. At this time, the tiger demon below had already collapsed the city wall, and the people in the town were fleeing in panic. The tiger demon roared, leaped up and opened its bloody mouth. Just as it was about to bite towards the crowd, suddenly, a golden light flashed. A translucent barrier suddenly appeared in front of everyone, and the light of the array formation shone brightly. Countless golden array formations appeared in the sky, and in an instant, the entire town was reflected in a golden light. That barrier grew bigger and bigger and directly enveloped the entire town inside. Tiger demon, don't you dare do evil. A deep male voice seemed to come from the sky and instantly spread to everyone's ears. Seeing that the tiger demon was unable to cross the barrier no matter how hard it tried, the panicking crowd instantly quietened down. They all looked up into the sky in shock, only to see a man in fluttering white clothes standing in the air. His body was surrounded by white light, making it hard for people to see him clearly, but they could not help but feel a sense of unreachable distance. I Ching and Shining quietly snuck into the crowd, watching Father Nyo's grand show-off. Lone Moon changed his hand and conjured another seal. Suddenly, another array appeared and fell directly on the tiger demon below. A huge pressure immediately pressed down on the demon below. The tiger demon could not stand steadily and was about to be suppressed to the ground. Seeming to understand that it was no match for the tiger demon, it turned around and wanted to escape. However, the person in the sky raised his hand, and instantly, a row of swords fell from the sky, directly cutting off its escape route. One of the swords even pierced its front paw, causing the tiger demon to immediately let out a cry. But that ethereal voice sounded again. Tiger demon, your body is full of blood and resentment. You have violated the taboo of cannibalism and brought disaster to the people. Your sin is unforgivable. Today I will help the people of this town and get rid of you, the scourge." With that said, he conjured a seal with one hand and instantly, a huge sword appeared in the air, shining with golden light and blinding. The tiger demon wanted to escape in fear, but it was suppressed by the sword chi and could not move. It could only watch as the huge sword fell directly, and the whole demon tiger instantly stopped breathing. The townspeople were all stunned. After a long while they reacted with a face full of excitement. "That monster is dead. That monster is really dead. That's great, we don't have to escape anymore. He saved us and killed that monster. That person can actually fly and can even kill such a huge monster." "Yes, and those just now. What exactly is he? Could it be that he is? The crowd pondered for a long time but did not come up with anything. Shining, who was watching from the side, added casually, "He's an immortal." The crowd was stunned and suddenly came to a realization. They cheered even more excitedly. "Yes, yes, yes, it's an immortal, it's definitely an immortal has come to save us. Only immortals can use this kind of immortal spell, he is definitely an immortal. An immortal has descended to the world to help us subdue the monster." The crowd became more and more excited as they spoke, and some people were already bowing to Lone Moon. Only then did Shining continue to eat her fruit. Yes, the importance of a supporting role. Seeing that the effect of the advertisement was almost over, Lone Moon then removed the array around them, leaving only a few spells to illuminate and create the atmosphere. Only then did he continue to maintain his unfathomable business expression, turn back to look at the townspeople on the ground, and still use that ethereal voice to speak. "You don't have to bow to me, I just happened to pass by this place. Perhaps I have fate with this place, so let me give you one more piece of advice." He sighed and continued, "Now that demons are running amok in the human world, those who are fated can go to the Eastern Immortal Mountain to seek the path of immortals, learn the art of subduing demons and solve this disaster." With that said, without another word, he turned and flew toward the east on his sword. In a short while he disappeared without a trace, even the dreamy light in the sky slowly dissipated, leaving only a huge tiger carcass at the city gate. Everyone looked at each other and began to recall the words of the immortal before he left, to seek the path of immortals, to learn the art of subduing demons. Did the immortal mean that mortals could also learn immortal spells? Everyone's eyes lit up, their faces full of eagerness. 100 miles away. "Can we go home and cook?" Shining laid lazily on a rock at the side, not wanting to move any more. "Of course not." Lone Moon refused. Shining was stunned. Didn't they finish the advertisement? How can we just advertise once? There's no Weibo here, the transmission of information is slow, we have to go to a few more places, and let everyone know that we can cultivate. He turned to look at the two people who had only done the supporting role from the beginning to the end. "I'll go alone, you guys can't help anyway." With that said, he tore the person from the rock and threw her to Chef. "You guys go to the place you chose last time, plant the immortal meridian and build the sect first." Planting the immortal meridian is no problem. I Ching frowned and answered, "But the house? Who's going to build it?" Lone Moon was stunned, only then did he think of this question. I Ching frowned and said casually, "We already had the places we used to live, the only invincible sect that was built by Rabbit, now there's no rabbit here." With that said, 3 pairs of eyes immediately turned to look at a certain little squirrel selling mushrooms. The squirrel trembled and immediately shook his head like a drum. I only know how to plant mushrooms." "What's the use of you?" This was the most useless little animal they had ever picked up. Chapter 5:10. Perhaps the disdain in their eyes was too obvious. The squirrel could only add weakly, "How about I build a nest for you?" He still knew how to build a nest. A very big one. The 3. "Who wants to live in your nest?" "Forget it." Lone Moon took out a white box and handed it to I Ching. "This is a cave abode that Fatty made when he was practicing last time. It's not big, just make do with it." He took out a summoning amulet and asked Fatty to come over as soon as possible. "I'll meet up with you in a few days. Also," he pointed at the squirrel demon, "find a place to release this mushroom." He explained everything, focusing on Shining before summoning his flying sword. Just as he was about to fly away, he gritted his teeth and turned back, taking out the snacks he collected from Shining last time and stuffed them back. "Stay here and eat your fruits, don't lose them again." Shinying's eyes lit up. "Yes, Father Nyo, no problem, Father Nyo." Lone Moon then turned and flew away with the expression of a worried old father. He was tired to death for his troublesome children. For mortals who had not come into contact with immortal cultivation, it was quite easy to deceive. No, it was quite easy to advertise. Lone Moon only set up a few small spells everywhere and subdued a few troublesome demon beasts along the way. Slowly, the rumor that there was an immortal mountain in the east and fated people could ascend it to seek immortality spread throughout the entire human continent, and many people had already begun to set out to find the immortal mountain. Lone Moon also distributed a few maps at the right time, and spread rumors that the younger one was, the easier it was to cultivate and so on. There would definitely be a lot of people going there. The advertising here was very successful, but when he thought of those two troublesome prodigals, his heart was in a mess, and he felt that it would be abnormal if they did not cause some trouble. So when he finished his work and hurried back, he saw that Spirit Peak floating high in the air, surrounded by immortal chi, and especially that magnificent building on top of the Spirit Peak. He could not react for a moment. This was Chef and Xinying's doing? He subconsciously released his divine sense and scanned the place. He found that it was not transformed from an artifact. It was a real palace and there was a large group of them. He could still vaguely sense the aura of the immortal meridian flowing on the ground, but the peak was filled with spiritual energy, and even the conversion of the spiritual energy had been completed. The family's prodigal son had suddenly become so obedient and capable. The old father was a little confused. He turned around and walked towards the back of the hall. "Father Nyo, you're back." Xinying waved a hand in greeting, then quickly swept the food into her own bowl. The corner of Loneman's mouth twitched. He sat down at the table and looked around. "Chef, what's with these palaces? Who did you capture to build it?" "I didn't capture anyone," I Ching answered seriously. "It was all built by Master." "Xinying?" Lone Moon narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "I'd believe you if you said she would demolish a house." "Building a house, he. Wait." He immediately stood up and carefully looked around. He was too shocked just now to notice. "Why do I feel that the layout of this house is a little familiar? Why does it look a little like Hongmeng's?" "You guessed right. It's Purple Night Palace." I Ching answered seriously. "You pulled Hongmeng over and made him build one just like that?" "That's not it." I Ching shook his head. "Master said that building a house is too troublesome. Anyway, Hongmeng has ready-made houses. We can just move it over and use it." "So?" The corner of Loneman's mouth twitched. "You move the entire Purple Night Palace over?" "That's the fastest way." "Can I ask, what's left over there?" I Ching thought about it. "There's still the square in front." After all, there were still many divine beings who had not woken up from their meditation. Lone Moon was silent for a while, then took a deep breath. "Sha." He clenched his fists by his side and patted Lone Moon's shoulder. With a serious face, he raised his thumb. "Good job." I Ching, Xinying, after teaching for so many years, these two finally had some of her old father's true teachings. She was a little gratified. On the other side of the sea, Purple Night Palace was left with a bare mountain top. Hong, bankrupt, Meng stood on the empty square, feeling a sense of desolation in his heart. "Brother Hong, do you want a carrot to calm you down?" Rabbit could not bear to leave, so he handed a carrot over. "Hongmeng, one may not be enough." "It's all right, I'll give you a basket." With the housing problem solved, Lone Moon had a peaceful meal. He was just about to ask about the spirit chi here. After all, Purple Night Palace was originally Hongmeng's palace. This place should be filled with god power. Cultivators definitely could not withstand god power directly. Even immortal chi was not very suitable at the beginning of cultivation. Actually, spirit meridians were the best. But this plane had just been opened. Immortal meridians and god power were everywhere. Spirit meridians, which were relatively rare, were hard to find. He was still thinking about what kind of array to set up after planting the immortal meridians to convert the immortal chi into spirit chi. He did not expect Chef and the others to solve this problem in advance. Just as he was about to speak, Fatty walked in. Seeing him, he was instantly delighted. "Master, you're back." He walked over quickly. Behind him, a small figure carrying a basket followed. Lone Moon nodded. He glanced at the figure beside him and turned back to look at Chef. "Why is this mushroom still here? Didn't you release it?" The one beside Fatty was that squirrel demon. "I'm very useful." Mushroom stepped forward and hurriedly said, "I know how to grow mushrooms." "Who wants your mushrooms?" Lone Moon frowned. "Master, the mushrooms it grows have the effect of converting immortal chi." Fatty hurriedly explained. "The spirit chi here is all converted by the mushrooms it grows. It can convert immortal chi. Lone Moon was shocked. He turned to look. There were indeed a few mushrooms growing in the courtyard. One look and he knew that they were created by sorcery. They were emitting faint spirit chi. What's going on? How could demons have such an ability unless it's not an ordinary demon, I Ching said in a low voice. Lone Moon scanned the squirrel demon from head to toe. He raised his hand and conjured a seal. The squirrel's body shook and instantly changed back to its original form. The basket in its hands fell with a thud. It happened to cover its body and its big tail. The squirrel began to struggle in a panic. Fatty hurriedly opened the basket and rescued it. It seemed to be scared out of its wits. It quickly climbed onto Fatty's shoulder and hid behind him. It stared at Lone Moon with a pair of big teary eyes. It was the size of a palm. It was indeed a squirrel. But why could it create a mushroom that could convert spirit chi? Fatty, bring it over. He wasn't Shining. Was it so scary? Don't be afraid. Fatty comforted the squirrel demon. He then carried the squirrel down from his shoulder and brought it over. Chapter 5:11. Lone Moon adjusted a bit of immortal chi and reached out to touch the squirrel's forehead. After checking its body, his eyes widened. Spirit chi. This squirrel demon's meridians were filled with spirit chi, and there was no demonic chi at all. He had thought that it was a little demon that had just gained sentience, which was why its demonic chi was so weak. It turned out that it did not have any at all. And the aura of the wood spirit chi was vaguely familiar, just like a carrot. You're a vegetation spirit? Lone Moon was shocked. Only vegetation spirits could communicate with all plants, so it was not strange that they could create mushrooms that could convert spirit chi. But he immediately denied it. No, I'm really a squirrel. Didn't it eat a big pine nut? Shining suddenly said. Lone Moon paused and then reacted. You've eaten vegetation spirits before? Vegetation spirits actually did not have a specific shape. After gaining sentience, they could change their shape according to their own will, like a carrot. It was only because Shining kept calling it a carrot that it grew more and more like a carrot. The squirrel said that the big pine nut that Little Flower gave it to eat should be a vegetation spirit that had not yet gained sentience. That was why it became a demon and had wood spirit chi all over its body. Its level was still low now, so it could only plant all kinds of mushrooms. When its cultivation level increased, as long as it had seeds, it would probably be able to plant all kinds of immortal herbs. Who knew how many cultivators would fight over it? Master. Fatty could not help but speak up. It's a little demon with nowhere to go. If it goes out, it will probably become food for other demons. Let it stay here. I will take care of it. Lone Moon glanced at Fatty. Was he thinking about his own situation, so he sympathized with this squirrel? Suddenly he wanted to ask, do you still remember the rabbit at Daming Lake? If you want to stay, then stay. This would save him the trouble of setting up a new array and converting spirit chi. Fatty was instantly delighted. Just as he was about to say something, Lone Moon changed the topic and added, the fee for taking care of it will be deducted from your account book. Fatty tripped and almost fell. He felt that the burden debt on his shoulders had become even heavier. But Lone Moon sat back down. Don't think that just because you call me master, you don't have to pay your debt. He was not willing to take care of just anyone. Shining and I Ching. Calmly munching on the food, the immediate family expressed that they had nothing to fear. A few months later, on the open space on the east side of the continent, a dense crowd had gathered. Most of them were children around the age of 10, but there were also youths in their 20s or 30s. Some wore gorgeous clothes while others were in tatters. They seemed to be people from all walks of life, and they were all looking around excitedly. These were the first batch of people who had heard the news and gathered here to try their luck. Recently, a rumor began to spread in various countries in the human world. At noon today, a celestial mountain would appear and accept disciples. Those who were fated could enter the mountain to cultivate. They would have the opportunity to learn extraordinary skills and might even ascend to become an immortal. Although this rumor came from a strange place, there were still many people who came from afar to witness this so-called celestial mountain. However, when they arrived, they didn't see a celestial mountain. They only saw a strange stone by the sea. On it were the words, Celestial Ascension. The words glowed with a faint golden light. It didn't seem ordinary. What immortal mountain? It's just a piece of rock. Some of the people who had come from afar couldn't help but feel disappointed when they saw that. Yeah, where are the immortals? They made us come all the way here. Why don't we come out to take a look? It seems that all the things about cultivating to become an immortal are lies. Although there were many people here, most of them didn't really come to become immortals. Instead, they were here to watch the show. In the end, they didn't see the show and only saw a piece of rock. It was inevitable that they lost their patience and wanted to leave. However, there were still more people who stayed, including some who had actually seen the immortals. You can't say that. Didn't you say it was noon? It's not time yet. Yeah, I've seen the immortals with my own eyes. The celestial mountain must be here. That's right. Maybe it's because we are mortals and haven't seen it at all. Everyone thought about it and agreed. Since they were already here, they didn't mind waiting for a few more days. The sun rose higher and higher, and the surrounding temperature also became hotter. The crowd that had gathered decreased a little. Soon it was noon. Apart from that piece of rock, there was still no celestial mountain, let alone immortals. Everyone revealed a disappointed look. It's a lie indeed. Someone couldn't help but curse. I don't know who spread the rumor. I must find the culprit and beat him up. With that said, he lifted his leg and kicked the strange rock beside him. But there was a loud bang, and the rock instantly emitted a blinding light that shot into the sky. The person was so scared that he fell to the ground. The restless crowd suddenly quietened down. They widened their eyes and looked at the scene in front of them in shock. They saw the golden light on the rock suddenly spread to both sides. As if a layer of curtain had been lifted, the sky suddenly shook. The coastline, which was originally a straight line, suddenly changed. Suddenly, mountains appeared, hidden in the clouds. And above the mountains, a huge floating peak hung high in the sky. The peak was surrounded by clouds and mist, and the ground was bathed in sunlight. One could faintly see a magnificent palace on the top of the mountain. Immortal. Immortal mountain. It's an immortal mountain. Someone exclaimed loudly. Everyone stared at the mountain floating in the sky. There was no longer any doubt in their hearts. So there really was an immortal mountain. At this time in the main hall. Who placed the spirit testing stone under the mountain? Lone Moon turned and asked. The advertisement had almost gone to waste. It's me. Fatty raised his hand weakly. Why did you block the entrance with the spirit testing stone? He had no choice but to open the protective mountain array. Did he know how many spirit stones it would cost to open it? Master, didn't you say that we need to select disciples with spirit roots before we can go up the mountain? Without spirit roots, one could not cultivate. Fatty lowered his head weakly. In the past, all the immortal sects did this. Lone Moon stiffened. Forget it. Put down the immortal ascension ladder. He silently made another note on Fatty's debt. Yes, master. Fatty stood up and took out a stone Dharma artifact. He was just about to throw it out. Wait. Lone Moon added. Add another spirit selection array. That way, people without spirit roots could not go up, and there would be no need for the spirit testing stone. Fatty nodded and added an array on the Dharma artifact. He activated his spirit chi and threw it out. At the seaside below, a white path suddenly appeared in front of everyone's eyes. It meandered towards the mountain in front of them. It's the path to the immortal mountain. Someone exclaimed. Only then did everyone seem to wake up from their stupor and scramble to run towards the road. But the moment they stepped on the path, some people ran further and further away, while some people whizzed back to where they started. No matter how hard they tried, they could not pass. Chapter 5:12. Everyone tried many times to no avail. Only then did they remember that the rumors said that only fated people could enter the immortal mountain. They had no choice but to retreat in disappointment. But there were very few people like that. Most of these people had spirit roots. The so-called immortal ascension ladder was actually used by the small world that Fatty was in to test and select new disciples. Different from the three azure realms, the sacred arrival world that Fatty was in had very few people without spirit roots. Immortal sects had a lot of resources and were naturally very strict about taking in disciples. Not only did they have to look at spirit roots, they also had to look at potential, enlightenment and other aspects. On the immortal ascension ladder, there were many sorcery that could affect one's state of mind. The clearer one's mind and the more determined one was, the faster they could reach the top. Indeed, the people who had originally rushed up the immortal ascension ladder at the same time had already created quite a distance between them. The people who had originally been in front were all young and strong men. In less than 7 minutes, most of them had fallen behind. Moreover, most of them were panting and sweating profusely. But the women and children who had fallen behind had caught up. Especially the children who were under 10 years old, they did not look tired at all. Instead, they looked back curiously at the seemingly breathless adults. After a quarter of an hour, apart from the 5 or 6 adults who were in front, the rest were all children. How much longer do we need before we can come up? Lone Moon asked casually. Fatty glanced at him and said, "We might need another hour. That wouldn't take too long. It should be over soon." Where are those two rascals? He turned around and realized that Chef and Shining were not in the main hall. "Master, have you forgotten?" Fatty reminded him. "It's noon now. They went to have lunch." The corner of Lone Moon's mouth twitched. "Mother **her, these two rascals. Father Nyo, it's time to eat." Just as he was thinking, Chef's voice sounded in his ear. "Oh, there's no need for Fatty. I didn't cook for him." "All right." Seeing that they still knew to call him, he would not deduct their food expenses this time. Fatty, why did he send a voice transmission as well? He did not want to know. The distance between the people on the immortal ascension ladder increased. The people at the back looked more and more pathetic. Some of them could not even stand. Many people chose to give up and turn back. However, the moment they turned around, the immortal ascension ladder automatically teleported them back to the seaside. Hence, there were fewer and fewer people on the immortal ascension ladder. This was also Lone Moon's initial thought. The main purpose of the people he chose this time was not entirely to establish a sect, take in disciples and teach them immortal cultivation. Instead, it was to pass down cultivation techniques to the human world. Therefore, not only did these people have to learn it, but they also had to pass it on to more people in the future. This allowed the human race to have the ability to protect themselves in the primordial world, where the heavenly Tao had yet to be completely established. In modern terms, it was to let some people get rich first, and then lead everyone to get rich together. Therefore, there was no need to recruit too many disciples, just a few would do. However, they were all going to become grandmasters in the future, so the selection process was naturally very strict. 15 minutes later, there were only a few figures left on the immortal ascension stairs. Most of the children were around 10 years old, and upon closer inspection, there were 20 to 30 of them. Next were young women, and there were only about 10 of them left. The ones with the least were the strong men who had been the fastest at the start. What was amazing was that there were 2 older men among them. However, they were not at the bottom of the group. Instead, they were walking behind the 2 children. As for the 2 children, they were walking at the back of the group. They were also the most exhausted. They were a boy and a girl. Among all the children, only the little boy was panting and sweating profusely. It was not because of the array formation, but because he was carrying a little girl on his back. The 2 of them were about the same age. Naturally, it was difficult for him to carry her, but he still persisted. The only person left in the main hall, Fatty, looked at the 2 of them curiously. The little girl's face was pale and sickly. One look and he could tell that there was something wrong with her body. From time to time, she would take out a small handkerchief to wipe the boy's sweat. The 2 of them seemed to be related by blood. They were probably siblings. Perhaps because the 2 of them were so special, Fatty could not help but look at them. They were still a distance away from the peak. The immortal ascension stairs would only be open for 2 hours. If they were lucky, they should be able to reach the top. At this moment, the person walking at the front was almost at the top. Fatty thought of the squirrel demon who was still planting mushrooms at the entrance. With a turn of his body, he teleported to the entrance of the mountain. Indeed, a child who was not even 10 years old, with a pink face, had already appeared at the entrance of the mountain. The squirrel demon, who was diligently planting mushrooms at the side, jumped in fright. The spirit chi in his body surged out uncontrollably. With a few spluttering sounds, the ground around him was instantly filled with mushrooms. Monster! The child was shocked. Perhaps because he was too young, he did not know fear. Instead, he pointed at the squirrel demon and shouted. He even wanted to reach out to grab the squirrel demon's huge tail. "Mushroom," Fatty called out and walked over. "Great. Great immortal." The squirrel demon threw the mushroom that had fallen to the ground and hid behind Fatty. He looked at the child at the entrance of the mountain with an aggrieved expression. The child was stunned. Perhaps he recognized Fatty's identity. He immediately bowed respectfully. Chi Su Nation's Lu Zheng greets Immortal Elder. His eyes were still looking curiously at the squirrel demon beside him. Fatty nodded and pointed to the empty space beside him. "You are the first person to reach the top. Wait at the side first. When the people behind you come up, I will bring you to see Master." "Yes, Immortal Elder." Lu Zheng obediently stood to the side. He was dressed well. His family must be wealthy. That was why he was so polite at such a young age. But he was still a child. He could not help but look around curiously. Fatty did not wait long at the mountain gate. The people behind him had already arrived. The first few were all children. When the 5th person arrived, a woman appeared. Then a young man and an elder came up. It was almost time. The stairway was starting to disappear from the bottom. Those who were still on it were immediately transported back. Just as the stairway was about to disappear completely, the boy carrying the little girl finally arrived. When he saw the mountain gate, his expression lit up. He seemed to use all his strength as he quickened his pace, wanting to climb the last few steps. Suddenly, a tall man rushed out from behind him. At this point, the stairway was about to disappear. He also quickened his pace. As if annoyed that the child was blocking his way, he pushed the person in front of him aside. Out of the way. Then, at the last moment, he reached the top of the mountain. When he looked up, he saw Fatty surrounded by immortal chi. Before he had time to rejoice, his figure flashed and he was transported back to the seaside. Chapter 5:13. Fatty furrowed his brows. He could have come up with the two kids, but he had taken the unnecessary step of pushing someone else. If mortals fell from here, they would be smashed to pieces. But the immortal ascension ladder could not harm anyone, or they would be teleported out. People with such evil intentions could not be accepted into the sect. He immediately cast a spell to summon the children who had fallen off the immortal staircase back to the immortal staircase. He retreated a certain distance and sent a sliver of immortal chi to the immortal ascension ladder, delaying the disappearance of the ladder. After all, it was pardonable. He would give them another chance and see what choice they would make. Unexpectedly, the child only hesitated for a moment before continuing to walk towards the mountain gate. His eyes were resolute and he did not let go of the little girl on his back. He really managed to reach the top of the ladder before it disappeared again. Fatty kept the immortal ascension ladder and closed the protective array outside. The people on the beach watched as the entire immortal mountain started to disappear. Fatty turned to look at the only 9 people who had climbed up. Since you can reach the immortal door, you are fated to be immortals. Follow me now. I will bring you to meet the immortal elders who will be teaching you immortal arts in the future. Teaching us immortal arts? Then they will be our masters in the future? Someone said excitedly. Fatty paused and thought about the 3 people in the back hall. Lone Moon had not acknowledged him as his disciple all these years, I Ching had never accepted disciples, and Lady Shen. Forget it. He replied, you should call yourselves exalted masters. They will teach you cultivation, but they will not accept you as disciples. Everyone was a little disappointed, but they still followed him to the back hall, their eyes filled with anticipation. Considering the image of the sect, Fatty calculated the time and even specially brought everyone around in a big circle before arriving at the rear hall. As expected, they had already finished eating. From afar they could see 3 people sitting in the courtyard. There were 2 men and 1 woman. The man on the left was drinking tea, while the woman in the middle was leaning on a chair, chewing on a fruit. The other man was pouring tea for her. Apart from the woman in the middle, the other 2 were surrounded by immortal chi. Master. Fatty looked at Lone Moon and said, the selected disciples have arrived. There are 9 in total. 9? Lone Moon paused. What a coincidence. The first batch of Invincible Sect disciples also consisted of 9 people. He scanned the group. Apart from 3 adults, the rest were all little radishes. Greetings, immortal elder. The 3 adults cupped their fists and bowed. The other children followed suit and bowed as well. Yes. Lone Moon nodded. He put down the cup of tea in his hand and stood up. Since you have passed the test of the immortal ascension ladder, you have officially entered the immortal sect. Everyone's eyes lit up. They were even more excited than before. Nowadays, demons are running amok in the human world, and there are even more dangers in the outside world that you can't even imagine. I'm teaching you the art of cultivation because I want to wait until you've mastered it before you can establish your own sects and raise even more cultivators to resolve the dangers in the world. Lone Moon spoke his mind directly. That's why I hope that all of you will work hard in your cultivation in the future. Only then will you have the ability to teach others. Yes, immortal elder. They replied in unison. Yes. Lone Moon nodded and introduced himself. My Taoist name is Lone Moon. That's I Ching. The one beside him is not important. He would not remember them anyway. Shining, son of AB***. From tomorrow onwards, we will officially teach you the art of cultivation. Today all of you can first. Lone Moon was just about to make arrangements for their accommodations. Immortal elder. A child on the right suddenly cried out. With a plop, he knelt down in front of Lone Moon. Immortal elder, please save my younger sister. As long as you can save her, I will do anything you want me to do. With that said, he began to kowtow to Lone Moon. Beside him was a little girl who seemed to be in a daze. She seemed to be unable to stand on her own and was being supported by an adult girl beside her. Lone Moon looked questioningly at Fatty. Fatty hesitated for a moment. It was obvious that he did not know what was going on, but he added, "This child's younger sister seems to be ill." He carried her on his back all the way up the immortal ascension ladder. Lone Moon looked at the child on the ground. "Tell me what exactly happened." Replying immortal elder, the little boy replied immediately. "A few years ago my younger sister was accidentally bitten by a monster. Since then she has been unable to walk. The villagers all said that she was an inauspicious person and would bring disaster. They chased us out. Immortal elder, you are an immortal. You must have a way to cure my younger sister, right? I beg you please save her? You climbed the immortal ascension ladder just to cure her?" Lone Moon glanced at the little girl and fixed his gaze on her legs. He could tell at one glance that her legs had been invaded by demonic aura. That was why they had become like this. However, it was not very serious. "Yes." The little boy nodded vigorously. "Then what if I let you choose between cultivation and curing your younger sister?" Lone Moon asked. The little boy was stunned. He did not expect Lone Moon to say this. He turned back to look at the little girl behind him and gritted his teeth. "I choose my younger sister. Immortal elder, please grant me my wish." Lone Moon nodded. This was a good child. He stood up and walked to the little girl's side. He lifted his hand and dispelled the demonic aura on her legs. The little girl hesitated. Suddenly she felt that her legs had regained strength. She subconsciously stood up straight. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Brother, I can walk now." The little boy was ecstatic. He immediately pulled his younger sister to kneel down with him. "Thank you, immortal elder." "Thank you, immortal elder. There's no need." Lone Moon reached out to support him. "You're so young. For you to go so far for your loved ones, you can be considered." He had wanted to praise him, but he suddenly felt something strange in his hand. Alarmed, he pulled the little boy up and examined him carefully. He even released a wisp of sword chi. Indeed, in a short while, he felt a tiny trace of sword chi rebound from his body. Holy shit, an innate sword embodiment. He actually had the same constitution as Chef. This was an innate sword cultivator's constitution, the kind that would not go astray. He immediately pulled the little boy back and said seriously, "I've decided to take you in as my disciple. Come call me master." With that said, he shot a look at the master and disciple behind him. "Shining, I Ching, Fatty, didn't you say you wouldn't take in disciples?" Fatty felt bitter. Lone Moon did not expect that he would meet an innate sword embodiment just by doing some advertisement. Thinking of the teaching history that he had been through, his stomach filled with bitterness. Forget about the body cultivators in the sect. The only one who taught diligently Fatty was an innate sword cultivator. This innate sword embodiment was practically here to save his worldview. Lone Moon finally saw some light at the end of the road for sword cultivators. Chapter 5:14. Lone Moon immediately accepted a disciple and insisted that he would completely isolate Xin Ying's negative influence. He taught her step by step. Even Chef was isolated. He didn't believe he couldn't teach a pure sword cultivator. Lone Moon even specially gave him a Taoist name, Jian Xing. It meant the prosperity of the sword cultivator business. Anyway, these people were going to go out in the future and establish their own sections. By then he would establish a sword cultivator sect. Just thinking about it made him happy. So he taught even more energetically, from basic swordsmanship to guiding qi into the body. He was unprecedentedly serious. And Jian Xing was indeed smart. Among everyone he was the first to succeed in guiding qi into the body. As for the others, the introductory teaching was basically handed over to Fatty. Lone Moon only occasionally gave them a few pointers. In addition, apart from being handicapped in swordsmanship, Fatty was an all-rounder in all other aspects. There was basically no problem teaching him. Among them, none of them had natural sword embodiment. Most of them were average, including Jian Xing's sister Ji Lin, who had 4 spirit roots. But fortunately, their comprehension was acceptable. Although they couldn't cultivate to become mighty figures, they could still establish their own sects and be teachers of Tao. In addition, this plane had just been born. It was a good time for cultivation. As long as they didn't slack off, it wasn't very difficult to become immortal. Fatty was obviously much more reliable than Lone Moon, who had fallen into the sword cultivator syndrome. After observing everyone's preferences for a few months, he began to teach them in a targeted manner. Only when there was a problem with swordsmanship would he ask I Ching to come out and help out. So everyone in the sect threw themselves into the business of cultivation, except Xinying. As a 10,000-year-old mascot, Xinying's contribution to the sect had always been only one mission: watering. In the past, with Radish around, she had to go to the back mountain to water it every day. Now that Radish was replaced by mushrooms, she had to water the mushrooms planted by the squirrel demon every day. Perhaps because of a fruit from before, the squirrel had a good impression of Xinying. In addition, the immortal meridian on this mountain happened to be planted in the back mountain. The squirrel had to plant mushrooms near the immortal meridian every day to completely convert the immortal qi into spirit qi. The general process was for the squirrel to plant in front, and she to water in the back. After planting, she nibbled on her fruit and he ate his pine nuts. It was a tacit understanding. Greetings, immortals. While the two of them were eating, a young girl's voice came from behind them. They turned around and saw a girl in white bowing to them. She was a little short and looked to be around 10 years old. Her face was very delicate, and it could be seen that she would grow up to be graceful. Mushroom was familiar with Fatty and recognized that this girl was the disciple that Lone Moon had taken in, Jianxing's younger sister. Her name seemed to be Jilin. He immediately jumped down from the rock and shook his hand in a panic. I'm not some exalted immortal. You can just call me Mushroom. It had just gained sentience not long ago and had never had a name. Xinying called it Mushroom, so it decided to call it Mushroom. Sister Mushroom. Jilin readily accepted her advice and called out sweetly. She turned to look at the person on the rock and asked, "How should I address this sister?" Xinying paused for a moment before replying, "Xinying." Sister Xin. Jilin called out as well. She looked at her a few times curiously before saying, "Exalted Guru Hui asked me to come to the back of the mountain to pick some spirit herbs for refining elixirs. I wonder if the two of you can." Go ahead, go ahead." Mushroom waved her hand generously. "Since Huizhe ordered you to just go ahead and pick." "Thank you, sisters." Her smile became even sweeter. She nodded at the two of them and turned to walk towards the spirit herbs on the ground. She began to pick the spirit herbs she needed seriously. Mushroom could not help but look at her curiously. She was a demon and most humans were afraid of demons. So even though Fatty had explained that she was just a good demon who had just started cultivating, these disciples would still subconsciously stay away from her. So she could only follow Xinying to plant mushrooms. Jilin was the first among the 9 to take the initiative to talk to her. She could not help but feel a little happy and looked at her a few more times. But she realized that the more she picked, the closer she was to the edge of the immortal meridian. Mushroom panicked and immediately reminded her, "Wait, you can't pick those mushrooms." Jilin paused and then retracted her hand. She turned back and smiled. "Sorry, Sister Mushroom. I thought they were spirit herbs too." "It's all right." Mushroom did not mind. Xinying, who was at the side, jumped down from the rock and dusted her butt. "I'm done watering them. Mushroom, I'm going back to eat." "Oh, okay." Mushroom nodded and smiled at Jilin again before following her. "I'm going to look for Huizhe too. Goodbye, sisters." Jilin also waved at Mushroom politely, but her gaze landed on Xinying at the side again. They did not know before they started cultivating. They thought that she was a great immortal guru like the other 3. But after they guided the qi into her body, they realized that this Xinying did not have any immortal qi. However, the high masters had a very special attitude towards her. Especially Guru I Ching, who would occasionally come to give them pointers. He was almost inseparable from her. So they became even more curious. But she did not seem to like to talk much. Jilin took a closer look. Something flashed in her eyes. Then she turned back and continued to pick the spirit herbs. Perhaps because he was addicted to teaching disciples, Lone Moon did not come to the rear hall to fight for food with Xinying recently. Without the control of the elders, Xinying completely let herself go. She finally lived a few years of eating and sleeping, eating and drinking without anyone caring about her. And the 9 disciples who accompanied her as immortal cultivators also improved very quickly in their cultivation. In just a few years they were almost at foundation establishment. Jianxing even reached the late stage of foundation establishment. He was just 1 step away from core formation. Lone Moon estimated the time. It was time for them to go out and gain some practical experience. "But, me?" Xinying paused. "Yes, you and Fatty bring them there together," Lone Moon said seriously. "Why? Why her? There are 2 more races fighting on the divine race's side. And it's near Purple Night Palace." Lone Moon frowned. "There are a bunch of people who have not woken up yet. Hong Meng called us back urgently to catch them and bring them back for lessons." Chef was in charge of catching, he was in charge of teaching. Oh. The place I chose for training happens to be near the segregated area by the sea. Although with Fatty's cultivation there is no danger. But after all, the rules of this plane have not been formed yet. And these disciples are going out for the first time. You go just in case. Chapter 5:15. Lone Moon continued, "Don't worry, we'll be back in no time. Anyway, you just have to follow along. Unless it's absolutely necessary, there's Fatty to take care of everything else." Sigh, so troublesome. Troublesome my ass. You're a manager after all, can't you have some self-awareness of your position? Lone Moon stuffed a bag into her hands. Here. This is the food chef prepared for you for these few days. Let's go quickly. With that said, without waiting for Chef who was washing the vegetables to return, he pushed Shining onto the departing pirate ship. Oh no, the spirit ship. Shining, Miss Shen. Fatty immediately waved at her. Perhaps because she was too much of a homebody, the 9 disciples in the sect only saw her once on the day they entered the sect, so they all turned to look at her curiously. The group of children back then had all grown up into young men and women. Shining lifted the bag in her hands, it seemed to be quite heavy, before walking towards Fatty. The place Lone Moon chose, to be precise, was outside the isolation zone of the human race on a huge island. There were spirit herbs everywhere, and no one had set foot on it for a long time. In addition, there were all kinds of demon beasts that had not developed intelligence, and all kinds of sounds could be heard from afar. It was indeed a good place for training. Fatty steered the spirit ship to land on a flat piece of land. This was the edge of the island and it was relatively safe. But there were also spirit herbs everywhere. The eyes of the 2 disciples who specialized in alchemy lit up. Fatty released his divine perception and scanned for a while before letting the disciples go out. Since it was their training, Fatty did not care much. He just let them decide which direction to go. The one with the highest cultivation among the 9 was Jian Xing, and he was also Lone Moon's in-house disciple, so the others seemed to see him as the leader. After picking a few spirit herbs, the few of them finally decided to head towards the center of the island. Fatty and Shining followed far behind. The island was filled with all kinds of spirit herbs and all kinds of cultivation materials. There was much more variety than in the sect. The disciples who rarely came out naturally would not let go of this opportunity. So most of the time was spent on collecting these materials. Among them, they also encountered sudden attacks from demon beasts, but they were not very powerful, and the few of them could deal with them together. Although some people were injured, they were more scared than hurt and continued to push forward. Perhaps it was the novelty of coming out for experience for the first time, these disciples were full of energy. In just a few days they had already traveled a long distance. However, he had to stop once a day in the morning, afternoon, and evening. And it was Fatty who forced them to stop, for no other reason than, it was time for Shining to eat. Fatty knew how punctual Shinying's mealtime was. Basically, it would not change. These disciples had already abstained from eating, so they didn't need to eat. In addition, there were only a few of them, so they naturally couldn't split up. Thus they could only stop and wait. At the start, the disciples were busy gathering all kinds of spirit herbs and materials, so they didn't think much of it. But slowly, what needed to be harvested and what needed to be collected was more or less done. Everyone still had to stop and wait for her to finish eating every day, so they could not help but have some opinions about this. Their faces were faintly filled with dissatisfaction, especially a few of the younger ones who looked at Shining with hidden anger in their eyes. Shining, on the other hand, did not react at all. It was as if she could not feel the resentment of the crowd. She continued to eat her food like a whirlwind. She even raised her head to look at Fatty, then kindly handed him a bowl of plain rice. Here. The corner of Fatty's mouth twitched. Instantly he thought of those days where he ate plain rice. It's alright, Miss Shin. I've already succeeded in abstaining from eating. Don't tempt me. Oh. Shining took back the rice she had just refilled and took a bite. I was just asking. So you didn't even want to give it to me? Fatty frowned. He turned back to look at the 9 disciples waiting at the side. He had taught these people for so many years, so he could naturally guess what they were thinking. Thus, he explained, Master has instructed that during this experiential training, we must not disturb Miss Shun while she eats and sleeps. Especially when she sleeps. Although he did not understand why Master emphasized on sleeping, he still patiently advised, cultivation is not something that can be achieved in a day. The main purpose of this tribulation is to train your state of mind. You must remember this. The few of them were stunned for a moment. Their expressions changed. Especially the older ones, they immediately reacted and no longer looked as impatient as before. But there were still a few who were indignant. When they entered the sect, they were not old to begin with. They had not experienced much. After these few years of cultivation, they were only in their teens. They became cultivators above mortals in one leap. Their state of mind had become too arrogant. Although they did not dare to say anything due to Loneman's instructions, they still blamed Xin Ying for delaying their time. They continued walking like this for a few days. After stopping to eat once again, a female disciple finally could not take it anymore. She walked over with a bottle of elixirs and said with some anger, "Here, this is an abstinence pill." Xin Ying paused and turned to look at her. There was still half a mouthful of rice in her mouth, chewing it with bulging cheeks. "Ziyu?" Fatty stood up angrily. He had clearly told her that this was Master's order. Exalted Master Huizhe. Ziyu looked at Fatty with some grievance. With this, she doesn't have to stop to eat. One abstinence pill could make one not hungry for a month. Fatty was about to reprimand her when Xin Ying glanced at the bottle in her hand and replied, "I don't eat mylar." "What mylar?" The other party faltered for a moment and immediately realized that she did not want to eat it. "I'm doing this for your own good. If you eat this, you won't have to go through the trouble of stopping to eat." Ziyu was getting angrier. "Why aren't you eating it?" "Because it doesn't taste good." Xin Ying replied matter-of-factly. "You." Ziyu was so angry that her face turned red. She thought that she was deliberately finding fault. "You're too much, you're delaying everyone's time, you." "Enough." Before she could finish, Fatty directly cut her off. His usually kind face had a rare darkened, and he unknowingly released some pressure, looking at Ziyu with some anger. "I've said it before, Miss Shin's 3 meals a day were personally instructed and agreed by Master. It's not your place to object." Ziyu froze instantly as if frightened by Fatty's sudden change in expression. She took a few steps back. Fatty then turned to look at the others. "Also, Miss Shin's cultivation level is high and her status is even more extraordinary. Since all of you are cultivating in the sect, you shouldn't have the slightest bit of disrespect towards her, otherwise the consequences are not something you can bear." How could he not tell that the reason why Ziyu dared to take out the abstinence pill to offend her face was actually because she saw that Xin Ying did not have a shred of immortal qi on her and did not abstain from eating. She thought that her cultivation level was not high or that she was just a mortal. What a joke. A mortal who could make an ancient ferocious beast cry with one slap, who could afford to offend her. So he simply pointed it out in case they did anything stupid in the future. Chapter 5:16. Everyone then cupped their fists and nodded, replying in unison. "Yes, exalted Master." Ziyu also retreated, but there was still resentment in her eyes. Xin Ying didn't care. She just continued to eat her meal. Then, she quietly extended the time for her meal from the usual 1 hour to 2 hours. And she even took out a few plates of pastries from time to time, eating as she walked. She even specially chose those that were fragrant and crispy. Crunch and a wave of fragrance wafted out, crunch and another wave of fragrance wafted out. It was so enticing that those disciples who claimed to be fasting in front couldn't help but turn back to look. There were even a few more demon beasts that appeared. Fatty, who was the closest, Fatty felt bitter but he couldn't eat, so he silently chanted the clear heart incantation along the way. This situation lasted for a few days until she finished all the pastries in the bag, then she changed back to fruits. At this time, the few of them had already completely entered the depths of the forest. They even encountered 5th-level demon beasts. This was already equivalent to golden core stage demon beasts. The 9 of them were all injured to varying degrees. They didn't know if Fatty was really angered by them provoking Xin Ying to eat several times, but he didn't attack. In the end, it was Jian Xing who had the highest cultivation who held back the demon beasts, and the few of them escaped together. This was the first time they faced such a dangerous situation. There was no longer the arrogant expression on their faces like when they first came here. Instead, there was a hint of fear. All of them had ugly expressions. After escaping danger, they chose a hidden place to rest and began to treat the injured. The injuries they suffered this time were many times more than before. 7 of the 9 were injured. Even Jian Xing, who was in the late stages of sword establishment, had a cut on his hand, deep to the bone. Fatty hesitated for a moment, but still didn't help them. To cultivators, this bit of injury was actually nothing much. Only one of them hurt his meridians, but the situation wasn't critical. He would be fine after slowly recuperating when he returned, plus the tribulation wasn't over yet. So he only stood far away. Xin Ying, who was beside him, also munched on her fruit calmly. "Sister Xin, are you eating the red spirit fruit?" Suddenly a light voice sounded. The green-robed girl among the 9 was looking at the fruit in her hand with sparkling eyes. Shining tilted her head and replied, I guess so. Chef planted them anyway, she only cared about eating them. It is indeed the red spirit fruit. Fatty took a look and nodded in affirmation. The girl's expression became even more pleasantly surprised. Rumor has it that the red spirit fruit is a rare spirit fruit. It blooms for 100 years and bears fruit for 100 years. It can also cure hundreds of poisons, heal meridians, and strengthen divine sense. Shining took another bite and replied, Oh. The girl froze for a moment, thinking that Shining did not understand, so she bowed respectfully and said, Sister Shin, I wonder if you still remember me. I'm Jilin, I met you a few years ago at the back of the mountain. I don't remember. Shining answered directly. Jilin's expression stiffened as if she had been slapped in the face, but she still maintained her kind smile and said, Sister Shin, senior brother Qingdong is seriously injured, and his meridians are even injured. Our cultivation levels are low, so we can't heal him. Coincidentally, you have this red spirit fruit, can you? She did not continue and only stared at the fruit in her hand. Shining did not reply but took another big bite. Can I what? As if she did not hear the meaning of her words at all. Jilin's expression stiffened even more, and she could only grit her teeth and continue, Can you give this fruit in your hand to senior brother Qingdong to heal? Oh. Xinying's eyes narrowed. You want my fruit? It's senior brother Qingdong who needs it. His injuries are serious and cannot be delayed. Sister Shin, please give him a red spirit fruit on account that we are from the same sect. Jilin said worriedly. Even the people who were healing over there all looked over. Especially the injured disciple. His eyes were filled with gratitude. Shining tilted her head, and then took out 7 to 8 red fruits from the bag. Is this it? Jilin's eyes lit up and she nodded vigorously. Yes, this is it. With that said, she reached out to take it. Thank? Before she could finish, Shining retracted her hand, causing her to grab empty air. Suddenly, she revealed a radiant smile at her. Haha, I'm not giving it. With that said, she even picked one up and took a bite, then put it down right in front of her, then picked up another and took a bite, then put it down again, until she had bitten all of them once. Instantly, there was only the sound of her crunching and chewing left. Jilin, Fatty, everyone's faces darkened. You're too much. Ziyu walked over angrily as if she could not hold it in anymore. She pointed at Shining and said loudly, Never mind that you've been holding us back along the way. Now that Qingdong is already so seriously injured, you're actually not even willing to give a fruit. You're simply rotten to the core. Ziyu. Fatty, who was stunned by Xinying's coquettish actions, finally regained his senses. Don't be rude. I didn't say anything wrong. She seemed to be so angry that she started criticizing without a care. She's been holding us back all along and even teasing little sister Jilin just now? No matter how high her cultivation is, she can't bully others like that. That's right. Perhaps because someone spoke up, the other disciples who were recuperating also spoke up. It's just a fruit, she clearly has so many, but she's not willing to take any out. That's right, we're from the same sect after all, why is she so heartless? Never mind that she didn't do anything along the way, she's even been eating and making noises that disturb us. That's right, who knows, that high-level demon beast might have been lured out by the sounds of her eating. The more everyone spoke, the more agitated they became. Apart from a few older people who looked troubled and did not utter a word, only Jian Xing did not speak, but his brows were also tightly knitted. Jilin, on the other hand, spoke words of persuasion with a face full of anxiety, but there was a faint hint of something else in her words. Everyone is mistaken, Big Sister Shin doesn't mean that, she's not targeting me on purpose. Hence, the more she persuaded, the more agitated everyone became, as if all the emotions that had been accumulated for many days were all unleashed. Insolence. Until Fatty could no longer hold it in and released his suppression. Only then did everyone fall silent. One by one they were forced to kneel down. Fatty was really angry. Where did these people get their sense of righteousness from? The fruit is Miss Shen's to begin with, it's up to her whether to give it or not. Giving it to you is a favor, not giving it is a duty. Where did you get the face to think that she must take it out to you? He swept a glance at everyone. The more he looked, the angrier he got. Moreover, this is your training. Miss Shen and I are just guides and guards. Sooner or later, you will also experience true danger. Now you can't even take this little injury. When that time comes, where are you going to find Miss Shen and force her to give you the fruit? Chapter 517. After being reprimanded by Fatty, everyone lowered their heads, but the dissatisfaction in their eyes did not fade. Fatty clearly did not have the brainwashing eloquence of Rabbit. Ziyu could not help but mutter softly, "But there's no need for her to treat little sister Jilin like this, Ziyu." But she looked up directly, still looking dissatisfied. "It's clearly enough for Master Huizhe to bring us alone, there's no need for her to come at all." Instead dragging them down. "You." Huizhe was just about to step forward. "Fatty." Xining suddenly spoke up, turning to look at him, her face completely devoid of anger from being offended by everyone. Instead she tilted her head and said seriously, "Your teaching standards are much worse than Father Nyo's? Even my popularity has dropped." The Rainbow Girls of Invincible sect were much cuter, at least they were all giving her fruits, not snatching them away. Fatty faltered, not understanding what she meant. But Xining stepped forward directly, squatting down to look at this Ziyu on the ground, supporting her head with one hand and asked, "Say girl, do you really think that without me around your experience will be more successful?" Being asked so seriously, Ziyu was instead stunned for a moment, a trace of guilt flashed across her eyes, but she still nodded stubbornly and said, "That's right. You all think so too?" She looked at the other 8 people. Those few glanced at her, some nodded unhappily, some just kept quiet. Only 3 older ones seemed to want to say something, but moved their mouths but did not speak in the end. "All right." Xining nodded with a good temper, even smiling at her. "Then I'll listen to you, I won't care anymore." Ziyu faltered. What did she mean, don't care anymore? Fatty also panicked for no reason. He had a bad premonition. Miss Xin? But Xining had already stood up. Just as she was about to turn, she thought of something. "Alright, let me give you a piece of advice." She turned back and added to Ziyu, "People who are stupid will die." What did she mean? Was she scolding her? Before she could think clearly, in the next moment, everyone present, including Fatty. It was obvious that something invisible had suddenly retracted from them, as if a large net that had been spread open was suddenly retracted. Immediately after. Roar, a series of deafening roars came from all directions, rising and falling continuously. It was as if the entire forest had woken up. Countless auras of demonic beasts rushed over from all directions. The roars of the beasts were accompanied by a faint pressure. The 9 people spat out blood on the spot. Their faces turned pale and their eyes widened in shock. What were those? Fatty only felt his heart thump and his entire heart sank. This was the voice of a high-level demonic beast. No. There were also immortal and even god-ranked ones rushing over. He finally understood. Just now, he clearly felt the aura of a high-level demonic beast beside him. However, those who jumped out and appeared in front of everyone were all low-level ones. Was this all because of Miss Xin? She had placed something around them that even he couldn't detect, so the demonic beasts didn't notice them. But now, it was gone. Therefore all the demonic beasts had discovered them. Die, 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 die. Fatty was about to cry. With these Foundation Establishment rookies, any high-level demonic beast that came would be able to kill them all with one slap. Although he wasn't afraid and could block them, he couldn't block 9 burdens. Quick. Fatty immediately set up an array to relieve the pressure on everyone. He shouted, "Run! Quickly run in the direction they came from. To the seaside." When they heard that, they didn't have time to think about what was going on. They climbed up in panic and turned to run in the direction of the entrance. Some even forgot to fly on their swords. Move together, don't split up. Fatty couldn't help but remind those who ran fast. Unfortunately, the huge fear took over. They only cared about running forward. Fatty had no choice but to carry them back and protect them all the way to the seaside. Behind them, there was a dense group of high-level demonic beasts. What was going on? 3 days later in the main hall. The corner of Loneman's mouth twitched as he glanced at the heavily injured disciples lying on the ground. Some had their meridians broken, some had their lungs injured, some had their cultivation reduced to the chi refinement stage. All of them were in a sorry state, looking like they were still in shock. Even Jian Xing's body was full of wounds. He seemed to be unable to stand steadily and knelt on one knee. What happened? It was just an ordinary tribulation. How did it become like this in the blink of an eye? Was this the prelude to being annihilated? Fatty was just about to speak when Jian Xing said first, "Master, it's our lack of skills. We couldn't beat those demonic beasts. That's why we were seriously injured. Master, please punish us." All of you were injured by demonic beasts? Lone Moon frowned and turned to look at Fatty, who was also in a sorry state. Fatty, didn't you follow us all the way? Why did it become like this? Master. Fatty's face was full of guilt. There were really too many demonic beasts. There were immortal beasts and divine beings among them. I couldn't take care of all of them. Shining, what about you? He looked at the only uninjured person who was taking out a fruit that had already taken a bite out of it. He had seen before that the demonic beasts on the periphery of the island were all low level. They couldn't have courted death by going deep into the island, could they? Besides, even if Fatty couldn't take care of all of them, he didn't know how to cheat. I'm off work? Shining replied seriously. What got off work? Lone Moon was just about to ask when a severely injured disciple struggled to answer first. Exalted Master. Our injuries were all caused by her. The one who spoke was the disciple named Qing Dong, who was injured by the 6th-level demonic beast at the beginning. Since he was already injured, Fatty naturally paid more attention when they retreated, so he was the one with the least injuries among the 9. Lone Moon's expression darkened instantly. His eyes narrowed slightly. Instantly, he had the illusion that a storm was brewing. Who did you say caused us? Try saying that again? It's her. Qing Dong didn't notice his expression. He reached out and pointed at Shining. His face was full of resentment. Originally, the forest was very safe. There weren't that many high-level demonic beasts. I don't know what she did. She suddenly attracted a herd of beasts. It's her. She called the demonic beasts out to bite us. Ah. Lone Moon laughed even colder. According to you, she has the ability to command demonic beasts? It must be her. Qing Dong said with a face full of certainty. Otherwise, why would there suddenly be so many demonic beasts? And there are so many of us. She's the only one who isn't injured. Those demonic beasts didn't even attack her. She must be in cahoots with those demonic beasts. Ridiculous. Master. Fatty was just about to say something when Lone Moon raised his hand to stop him. Let him continue. Chapter 518. Exalted Master. The more Qing Dong spoke, the more resentful he became. I was already injured then. Junior sister Jilin asked her for help. Not only did she not help, she even teased her. She even threatened her. Then many demon beasts suddenly appeared from the forest. He turned to look at Fatty, gritted his teeth and said with a look of desperation, "An exalted Master Huizhe, he had been siding with that bad person along the way. He did not listen to our explanations at all. That's why we were injured so badly." Lone Moon's expression became calmer. So, you think that all of you were injured, it was all Xinying's fault? Qing Dong did not answer, but the anger on his face grew. It was obvious that he thought so. Lone Moon turned to look at the other disciples. What about you? The other 8 looked at each other, seeming hesitant. He added, It's all right, speak honestly. Those who think the same as Qing Dong, stand up. I can prove that what senior brother Qing Dong said is true. Ziyu was the first to stand up. She even took 2 steps towards Qing Dong despite her injuries, glared at Shining and said, She's the one who caused us to end up like this. Qing Dong's eyes flashed with a trace of emotion. His gaze became even more righteous. Perhaps because there was someone taking the lead, the remaining disciples all raised their hands. In the end, half of them actually agreed with Qing Dong's words. The remaining 3 who were the oldest, Jianxing who had been kneeling on the ground and Jilin who was supporting him did not raise their hands. The fan in Lone Moon's hand creaked. He took a deep breath to suppress the irritation in his heart. His gaze became even colder. After a while, he looked at the remaining 5 and said, Why didn't you raise your hands? Do you think they are lying? The 3 were stunned, not knowing how to answer for a moment. After a while it was Jilin who spoke, reporting to Exalted Master, I think. Sister Shin does not seem to be such a bad person, although previously. I believe she would not do such a thing to harm her fellow disciples and cause them to die. With that said, she looked hopefully at Shining who was completely out of the situation. There may be other reasons for this. Junior sister Jilin. Qing Dong sighed, his eyes filled with heartache for her. She caused you to end up like this. Why are you still speaking up for her? The other people who raised their hands had the same expression, but their hatred for Shining grew. Lone Moon scanned these people from head to toe. Suddenly a smile appeared on his face. He asked, enunciating each word, Then, what do you think the punishment for such a serious crime should be? Everyone looked at each other for a while. In the end it was Qing Dong who said angrily. For a person like her, it wouldn't be too much even if her cultivation was crippled and she was expelled from the sect. The others nodded in agreement. All right. Lone Moon closed his eyes. He really could not continue asking. He directly stood up and said to Huizhe, Fatty, heal their injuries first. Yes, master. Fatty looked at everyone, shook his head and sighed. Only then did he form a hand seal, and a large-scale rejuvenation array appeared beneath everyone's feet. Everyone who was originally in a sorry state felt their bodies relax, and the wounds on their bodies healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. In a short while their external wounds were as good as new. Fatty took out another bottle of pills and handed it to the nearest disciple, asking him to distribute them to everyone. Eat this and within 3 days your meridians will recover. Everyone was overjoyed. They hurriedly distributed the pills and ate them. Indeed, the remaining internal injuries were greatly alleviated. They had already stood up and bowed in Lone Moon's direction. Thank you, exalted Master Lone Moon. No need to thank me. Lone Moon smiled at them, but the smile did not reach his eyes at all. Although your injuries have healed, let's talk about the punishment next. The few of them were stunned, especially the 4 who had just pointed out Shining. Their eyes all lit up. As you wish. Lone Moon said word by word, I will expel you from the sect. From today onwards, the 4 of you are no longer disciples of the sect. What? The 4 of them were shocked, thinking that they had heard wrongly. Fatty. Lone Moon ordered directly. Cripple their cultivation and send them down the mountain. Yes, master. Wait. Cheng Dong exclaimed, his eyes filled with fear and disbelief. Wasp. The one who did the wrong thing isn't. Before he could finish speaking, Lone Moon could not help but wave his hand. Instantly, a ray of sword chi flew towards him and hit his dantian. Cheng Dong only felt a huge pain. All the spirit chi in his body dissipated. He cried out directly. He fell to the ground again and started rolling. After cultivating for so many years, how did you cultivate such a group of idiots? Lone Moon finally could not take it anymore. He slammed the table and stood up. He seemed to be so angry that his whole body was releasing cold air. In an instant, the table and chair beside him turned into ashes. Shining finally raised her head. Father Nyo, the table is 100 spirit stones. Shut up. Lone Moon then turned his head and continued to rage. It's fine that you are stupid, but you still think so highly of yourselves and are ungrateful. Who was the blind one in the beginning to take in a group of trash like you? The blind fatty, air. It was me. Fatty directly knelt down. Please forgive me, master. He felt bitter in his heart. The other disciples also knelt down one by one. Their eyes were filled with fear at Lone Moon's sudden anger, but they still looked a little lost. Do you still not know where you are wrong? Lone Moon glanced at the few of them. What kind of place is that island? With your trash foundation establishment cultivation, can you go deep into the forest? Or do you think that there are only low-level demon beasts on such a big island? He took a deep breath and then said word by word, Fatty protected you out, but you can still be injured to this extent. How did you get in? Don't you have any F***king idea? Everyone's heart sank as if they had never thought of this at all. They all looked up at Shining in disbelief. It was her? How could this be possible? She looked like she had no cultivation at all. But when they entered, there was indeed no problem at all. Later there were so many demon beasts. Could it be because they angered her? Our invincible sect cannot tolerate idiots like you. Exalted Master. Only then did everyone know fear and began to desperately beg for mercy. Please forgive us, Exalted Master. We know we are wrong. They had seen the power of a cultivator. How could they be willing to return to being ordinary? Fatty, bring them down the mountain. Lone Moon did not have the slightest intention of changing his mind. The entire invincible sect did not let Shining suffer the slightest bit. What right did these immature people have to do this? Fatty actually did not have the heart to do this. After all, he had taught them for so many years. But he also understood that they only had themselves to blame. Yes, master. He directly produced 3 wisps of immortal chi and dispersed the spirit chi in their dantian. He pulled the few who were still crying out and walked out. Wait a minute. Shining suddenly spoke. Chapter 519. Shining. Lone Moon glared at her. Don't be so kind-hearted. I just wanted to remind you that you missed one. Shining took a bite of her fruit, then turned to point at Ji-Lin. Ji-Lin paled instantly, her face full of disbelief. Big sister Shin. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked like she was about to cry. Actually, Shining tilted her head, still looking lazy, her eyes narrowed. I quite like white lotuses, just not the black-hearted ones. Lone Moon frowned. Fatty, bring her down too. Yes, master. Fatty could only come back to pull her. No. I don't want to go down the mountain. Jilin really panicked this time, her tears flowed down. Exalted Master. Brother, help me. She hurriedly pulled Jianxing, who was beside her. Jianxing's face was also full of anxiety. He knelt down and begged, Master, little Lin didn't do anything wrong, why do you have to expel her too? She was his sister after all. Before Lone Moon could speak, Shining suddenly walked over, took out a familiar-looking bottle and handed it to Jilin. Here, I picked it up, I'll return it to you. That was a bottle of fasting pills, coincidentally the one that Ziyu gave to Shining. Jilin paled instantly, even her grip on Jianxing's hand loosened. She looked at the bottle in disbelief. She knew everything. Fatty was also stunned when he saw that bottle. She was the one who instructed Ziyu to help Shining abstain from food. Thinking about it, Ziyu was not a pill cultivator, Jilin was. Instantly, his expression darkened. He directly dispersed her cultivation and pulled her out. Well, yes. Seeing that Fatty was about to carry the 5 people out, Lone Moon suddenly added, I seem to have forgotten to tell you, Shining, she is the sect master of our sect. Now, not only the 5 disciples who were chased down the mountain, even the remaining 4 people widened their eyes, looking at Shining in disbelief. She was actually the sect master. Shining? Was Father Nyo pushing the blame back? MMP. Master. Jianxing looked at Lone Moon anxiously. I know what you want to say. Lone Moon stopped him from speaking. He turned to look at the remaining 3 disciples and said in a low voice, I'm teaching you cultivation because I really hope that you'll be successful in the future. I hope that you'll be able to pass on the art of cultivation to more people. I hope that you'll be able to protect the world and lessen the number of disasters. But I hope that all of you remember that I chose you because you happen to appear, not because you are irreplaceable. The few of them were shocked. Their expressions changed and they lowered their heads. Even Jianxing put down his cupped fists. Lone Moon looked at the few people who were being brought down the mountain and narrowed his eyes. You should be glad that Chef I Ching is not here today. Otherwise, not only the few of them but all of you can forget about leaving the mountain alive. Daring to provoke a cheat, did they really think that everyone was Xinjing? It was another watering day. Shining, is it really okay not to water them today? Mushroom glanced at the row of wilted mushrooms beside the immortal meridian and asked worriedly. I haven't eaten, so I don't have the strength to water them. Shining leaned against the rock like mud and nibbled on a fruit. I don't know when Chef will be back either. Father Nyo said that Chef went to help Rabbit hold the fort and supervise the second batch of students at the Purple Night Palace. He would only return after a period of time when Rabbit's brainwashing was complete. But didn't Great Immortal Lone Moon go to cook for you? The corner of Xinying's mouth twitched. She looked at Mushroom, not knowing what to say. Sigh, you don't understand. She would rather eat snacks every day than eat pig's swill. Do you want fruits? She handed one over. Mushroom's eyes brightened. He nodded hard and took it. Shining, you're the best person in the world. Mushroom gave her a good person card with an innocent look. You're the only person apart from Little Flower who gives me food. Fatty doesn't give it to you? Shining couldn't help but ask. Don't the two of you hang out often? Mushroom shook his head and pouted a little angrily. He only gives me carrots and told me to abstain from eating. Rabbit was indeed Fatty's true love. You're still the best. Mushroom's eyes shone as he looked at her. Just that. Why are the fruits you gave me these few days all bitten? Shining stiffened. Don't mind such details. Mushroom didn't ask any more. He thought for a while and added. Wuxia has been in a bad mood recently. He doesn't even accompany me to plant mushrooms anymore. I'm so bored by myself. What's wrong with him? Shining asked. He said he doesn't know how to teach disciples anymore. He's worried about what to do in the future. Oh, it's been so quiet here recently. Many people have disappeared. That little sister who gathered herbs last time is gone too. Mushroom said as he chewed on his fruit. You like her a lot? Shining turned around. She thought for a while before nodding. She's the only one who would talk to me out of those few people. I should like her, right? It frowned as if he didn't understand. But Wuxia told me to stay away from her. I don't know why either. She's clearly gone, why do you want me to stay away? Shining continued to nibble on her fruit. Alright, Shining. Mushroom tugged at her hand and pointed at the big tree in front. Do you owe that person a lot of fruits? Shining took a look and saw a person standing under the tree looking straight at them. He looked familiar. It seemed to be the disciple with the natural sword embodiment that Father Nyo had been talking about all day and showing off in front of Chef. She had forgotten her name. Am I the kind of person who would owe a debt? A daughter's debt should be paid by the father. Even if someone owed someone, it should be Father Nyo. But he's been there watching us for 4 hours. I see. Xin Ying's eyes narrowed. Then let's go back and watch. She couldn't lose out. Sure. Pure Mushroom nodded vigorously. Hence, 2 pairs of eyes fixed on the person under the tree. As they stared, they didn't forget to nibble on their fruit. For a moment, the entire back mountain was filled with the sound of crunching. Jian Xing stiffened for a moment. He held on for less than 10 seconds before shifting his gaze away awkwardly. Instantly, he felt that his actions were extremely stupid. But he also had an inexplicable feeling that he had lost. He coughed, frowned and retracted his gaze. Then, with a cold expression, he walked over and stopped in front of the 2. He cupped his fists and bowed respectfully towards Shining. Greetings, Sect Master. His gaze swept past Mushroom at the side. Shining answered lazily. He clenched his fists by his side and took a deep breath. Jian Xing is here this time to ask for forgiveness from Sect Master on behalf of my sister. I hope that Sect Master can forgive her previous rude offense on account of her young age. Chapter 520. Shining glanced at him and still answered lazily, Oh. Sect Master is willing to forgive her? Jian Xing was delighted. Then, I won't forgive you. She interrupted. The joy on Jian Xing's face froze and he asked subconsciously, Why? Is this very hard to understand? Shining tilted her head as if she couldn't understand why he would ask such a question. After thinking for a while, she suddenly turned to Mushroom and said, Mushroom, hit him. Mushroom faltered and immediately nodded obediently. It bit the fruit in its mouth, stretched out its hands and formed a mushroom the size of a bowl. Then it threw it at Jian Xing's face with force and even shouted loudly, Hey! Jian Xing didn't react for a moment, only to see that mushroom slap his face. The mushroom that had just formed was soft, so it naturally didn't hurt. It bounced and fell to the ground, but left a black and wet circle on his face. That was a shiitake mushroom. Jian Xing was completely stunned and was about to explode in anger. But Shining looked at Mushroom first. Mushroom apologized. Oh. Mushroom nodded, took out the fruit in its mouth and said, I'm sorry. Jian Xing, do you understand? Shining asked. If you understand, go back and continue your sword practice. Not all apologies could be forgiven, especially apologies with a purpose. Jian Xing glanced at her, many emotions flashed across his eyes, but finally they sank helplessly. He cupped his fists and bowed again, then turned and left, a little shakily. Also, Shining suddenly spoke again. About what happened before, I really didn't take it to heart. I didn't want to say it at first, but you guys asked for it and made Father Nyo angry. Now that it's settled, let's stop here. They still don't give up. She narrowed her eyes. When the time comes, and they make Father Nyo sad, I will really get angry. Jian Xing paled. He did come with the intention of getting her to forgive his sister first. As long as she agreed, he could beg Master to bring Jilin back. But he didn't expect that she actually saw through it at one glance. His heart sank and he immediately quickened his steps and left the back mountain. The mushroom had a blank look on his face. He had absolutely no idea what they were talking about, but he did not pay much attention to it either. He jumped down and picked up the huge mushroom on the ground. He jogged to the side of the immortal vein and planted it. Don't waste it. It was a huge one. Shining had sad enough. Thinking that Father Nyo should have left the kitchen, she waved at Mushroom. I'm going back. Goodbye, Shining. Mushroom also waved his tail. Only then did she slowly stand up. Suddenly, a familiar voice came from beside her. Master. Shining hesitated. She looked around and then remembered the transmission talisman in her storage bag. She reached for it for a long time before taking it out. Chef. Master. The voice was filled with pleasant surprise. I send you messages every day. Why are you only responding now? Oh, I put it in the bag and forgot. There were too many things in the bag. Fortunately, there were some fruits in stock, so he flipped the talisman to the top. Master. The voice in the talisman sounded a little aggrieved, but it was immediately replaced by deep worry. Are you okay? Did he eat well and sleep well? Did he step on the blankets at night? Oh yes, you should have finished the vegetables I left behind, right? I asked Father Nyo to bring back some new ones. Did you get them? If it's not enough. What? Father Nyo has brought vegetables. If she had known earlier, she would not have pretended to water the plants. Xining hurriedly quickened her steps and walked towards the back of the hall. Master, don't worry. I know those are not enough. I've already made more and asked Hong Meng to send them over. Good chef. Fortunately, it was still all right. Master, I will only be back in a few days. You have to stay in the back hall. Don't go down the mountain. She had already gone down once. Also, although the back mountain is smaller than invincible sects, you have to find someone to lead the way. If Radish is not here, you can ask Mushroom. Also, don't eat too many fruits. Eat some pastries occasionally. They're all in the storage bag. Be patient and look through them. The sky is turning cold. Although Master is not afraid, it's better to wear a few more clothes. I've put them in the cabinet in your room. If anything happens, you must inform me first. I've already set up the transportation array. I'll rush back immediately. And Master, I miss you so much. Xining stopped in her tracks. She faintly felt a warm current pass through her heart. The corners of her mouth lifted for no reason. Master. Seeing that she did not reply, Chef called out carefully. Was she angry? Xining laughed. Really? You really miss me that much? Xinying's smile deepened. What do you think? Chef was stunned. What do you mean, what do you think? Can't say it? Then write 3,000 words of your feelings. There are no restrictions on the style. Poems are excluded. I'll hand in the manuscript in 3 days. He had never received a love letter before. He wanted to give it a try. Okay. Good. 3 days later. A white spirit bird flapped its wings and flew to the back hall. A certain old father recognized the aura that belonged to Chef. Thinking that something big had happened in Purple Night Palace, he conjured a seal. Instantly, the spirit bird turned into a thick stack of letter paper and landed in his hands. Looking down, he saw that it was densely filled with words of longing for a certain foodie. The words were so beautiful and full of emotion that it made one's hair stand on end. Lonman's chest tightened. Instantly, he just wanted to slap the thing in his hands hard on a certain person's face. Go to hell with your dog food. Degree. After returning from a training trip, there were originally 9 disciples, but now they were reduced to 4. Lone Moon was still a little frustrated. But he did not regret it. He chased those disciples down the mountain not only because of Xining, but because their mentality was indeed not suitable. If they were in the small world in the past, they might not be directly abandoned if they were in a large sect. But these people were originally cultivated by them. They were going to establish their own sects in the future. In other words, they would be the role models for all cultivators in this world in the future. But with their temperaments, who knew what kind of cultivators they would produce? Actually, he could also guess why they were like this. These people who were chased out were all about 10 years old when they first came up the mountain. They had never seen any big waves or experienced any big setbacks. Suddenly becoming cultivators above all living beings, they naturally thought that they were a cut above everyone else. They were too confident in their own identities. Even after Fatty had clearly reminded them. They still believed that Xining was just a mortal to be trifled with. If she was a mortal, she should be below them. Chapter 521. Xining had never shown her strength in front of them, and these disciples rarely saw her. But it was not that they could not see the importance that Fatty I Ching and himself placed on her. Those few older ones would still have some reservations. But they had never experienced this, so they trusted themselves more. They thought that after learning some abilities that surpassed mortals, they were different from the rest. They even formed the idea of the strong being respected in their minds, so they targeted her without any reservations. They even thought that even if they were wrong, he would not punish them because of a mortal. Such thinking was completely contrary to Loneman's original intention. Continuing to let them grow would only make them more arrogant and conceited. They would even completely look down on mortals who were inferior to them. He wanted to find a bodyguard for the human race, not a group of people who would rule and trample on them. He could not help but think back to those people he had taught in the past. The reason why Invincible Sect did not go astray was because Yu Hong and the others were trampled by high-level cultivators in the beginning. They had seen the deepest darkness, so they knew that sunshine was not easy to come by. Fatty was imprisoned in Divine Imperial Sect for many years, and knew the evil in people's hearts, so he cherished the good in the world even more. Even in Song Ren's small world, that group of talisman cultivators who exorcised deviant ghosts. Their purpose of cultivation was only to protect the civilians. But these 9 people were completely different, especially those younger ones. They had opportunities that others did not have from the beginning, and this opportunity gave them the ability to be above everyone else. So they naturally became arrogant, no longer seeing the weak in their eyes, thinking that they had already transcended, but forgot that they also came from there in the beginning. Those 3 older ones had experienced things, and Jianxing must have suffered for his sister before, so he still had reservations. But the others completely did not have the reverence that they should have. A group of people who had no reverence for the world, how could he expect them to turn back and protect this world? Lone Moon suddenly realized that he could not completely put the hope of the human race on these few people. He had to make more preparations for everything. After all, apart from entering school to teach, there was another word in the world called self-study. As long as there were learning materials, although there would be a difference with or without a teacher, the overall general direction should not be a problem, right? Like Chef, what was the difference if he had a master or not? He still had to rely on self-study. After Lone Moon thought it through, he asked Fatty to prepare mini legacy jade slips. Thinking that most people still did not know how to use spiritual energy, he also prepared some books on drawing spiritual energy into the body. Of course, these were all copied by Fatty, who asked this world to not have a photocopier. He also instructed Fatty to forge a batch of spiritual weapons. After that, he started to wander around the continent of the human race like a bookseller, tossing a book here and a jade slip here and there. He even casually opened a few small mystic realms and threw some spirit plant seeds inside, letting them grow freely. Then he returned to Purple Night Palace and grabbed a few immortal meridians. He had to think of a way to dilute it, turn it into a spirit vein, and then return to the human continent to plant it everywhere. The entire continent was filled with spiritual chi. He even gritted his teeth and tossed the spirit artifacts and immortal artifacts he had collected from Fatty back then around, or set up some array formations to set the time for them to appear. Only then did he stop. He suddenly understood Lan Hua's feelings back then. The feeling of throwing treasures everywhere and not being able to take them back was too painful. Hence, he took out his account book and carefully recorded all the accounts on Hong Meng's head. Yes, it was finally not so painful. Hong Meng, who was passing carrots to Rabbit in Purple Night Palace, shivered. He kept feeling that something was missing. After doing all this, Lone Moon heaved a sigh of relief. He believed that in no time, there would be many cultivators appearing on this continent. Of course, he would also be more strict with the teaching of his disciples. After all, they were taught by famous teachers. It would be too embarrassing if they could not compare to those who were self-taught. Fortunately, there were only 4 people left. They were easy to teach. Jianxing was a sword cultivator. Lone Moon was busy, so he could only use the old method and throw him into the 10-level sword array. As for the remaining 3, they were all taught by Fatty. It was much easier than before. Pills, talismans, arrays and artifacts all had their own strengths, especially the oldest one. He was already in his 50s or 60s when he started cultivating. He had gone through a lot of hardships before he succeeded in foundation establishment. He was the last one among them to do so. But he was also the calmest one. Fatty was originally worried that he would give up due to his lifespan before he could cultivate to the end. He didn't expect him to actually persevere all the way. He was also a dual cultivator of talismans and arrays. Even though his cultivation fell behind the others in the beginning, he slowly became the most solid among the 3. He learned the most deeply and was the most hardworking. Occasionally he would even give pointers to the other 2. Even Fatty couldn't help but pay more attention to him. Considering that they had already adapted to spirit chi, Lone Moon let mushrooms stop planting. The spirit chi on the mountain was also directly changed to immortal chi. This way their cultivation increased even faster. Among them, Jianxing was the fastest. Ever since the last time, Lone Moon had talked to him a few times. That was his sister after all. It was normal that he couldn't bear to be chased off the mountain just like that. Lone Moon explained the relationship to him. Seeing that he didn't have any resentment, he let him continue learning with ease. He learned very quickly. Usually he could learn a sword technique that Lone Moon demonstrated once. In less than 10 years he had reached the 5th level of the 10-level sword array. Although he wasn't as crazy as Chef back then, he was improving at a godly speed. He was indeed a natural sword embodiment. Time passed quickly. What needed to be taught was more or less taught. Those that they couldn't learn in a short time were also remembered. Because the heavenly Tao of this world hadn't been born yet, there was no heavenly tribulation when their cultivation increased. It was just that once they reached the realm, they directly rose. The 3 that Fatty taught were already at core formation. Jianxing's cultivation was already at the nascent soul stage. Lone Moon felt that it was time for them to go down the mountain and really understand the dangers of this world. Considering the unpleasant experience of the previous experience, Lone Moon decided to bring them there personally. He also dragged Xining along. Why me again? She was unhappy. Chef isn't back yet. Do you think you can survive staying in the sect alone? With no one cooking and watching over her, she would either get lost or starve to death. There was a high chance that it would be the former. Should she tell her that Chef would actually get the spirit bird to send food over every once in a while? Stop talking nonsense. Let's go. Lone Moon couldn't be bothered to explain to her. He directly pulled her down the mountain. Among the 4 disciples, 3 of them were Fatties. Fatty naturally followed along, bringing Mushroom along with him. With Fatty watching over him, Mushroom had been working hard in his cultivation these few years. He cultivated 1 tail into 5. Although he wasn't a big demon yet, he was no longer the little demon he used to be. Naturally, he also learned how to truly transform. He didn't need to drag his tail everywhere to plant mushrooms. Thus, what was originally a disciple experience became a trip for the whole sect. Chapter 522. Lone Moon flew down the mountain with Xining on his sword. They walked towards the immortal ascension stone by the sea. It was densely pasted with slips of paper. Some were from a long time ago while some were very new. All kinds of wishes and requests were written on the slips of paper. Ever since the last time they opened the mountain to recruit disciples, mortals would often come here. Some people started pasting all kinds of wishes on the stone, hoping that immortals could help them fulfill them. They had already used the immortal ascension stone as a divine stone. But among these slips of paper, there were also some requests for help, like demons causing trouble. When Lone Moon saw them when he went out to spread his wealth, he would also solve them. Slowly it became a custom. Those who really met with difficulties would come here from far away to seek help from immortals. To distinguish, the slips of paper would be marked in red. He glanced at it and saw 3 red slips of paper. He took them down. 2 of the locations were rather far away. The closest one was a 2-day journey. He glanced at it and decided to make a trip. So he handed the slip of paper in his hand to Jianxing and said, "Let's go to the west, to this place called Cuhang City." "Yes, master." Jianxing nodded and took it. He glanced at it and handed it to the other 3. Just as they were about to fly on their swords, a female voice suddenly sounded. "Brother." A woman who looked to be in her 30s ran over. She looked at Jianxing in the middle with a look of surprise. She looked a little familiar and she had cultivation, just that she was still in the qi refinement realm. "Little Lin." Jianxing was stunned. He blurted out, "Why are you here?" Fatty was shocked. This person was actually Jilin, Jianxing's younger sister. It was just that her current appearance was no longer that of a young girl. She looked much older than Jianxing. The joy on the woman's face faded and was replaced by worry. Tears even gathered in her eyes. "Brother, I've been waiting here all these years." She turned to look at Lone Moon and knelt down. "Exalted Master, I was young and ignorant back then. I made a huge mistake. I already know I was wrong. I've been regretting it all these years. I dare not ask for Exalted Master's forgiveness. I only hope for a chance to forgive me." Lone Moon's expression darkened. He glanced at her and said, "Really? Then tell me, where did you go wrong?" Jilin was stunned, as if she did not know how to answer. He subconsciously looked at Xining, who was at the side, rolled his eyes and said, I shouldn't have been disrespectful to elder sister Shen. No, it's Master Shen." Ha! Before she could finish speaking, Lone Moon laughed coldly and said, "You don't even know what you did wrong, so how can you say that you did wrong?" If she really knew that she was in the wrong, she wouldn't have appeared here today, much less in such a weak state. Back then, Fatty had crippled their cultivation, but he hadn't harmed their foundations or caused them to lose their memories. If she worked hard enough, she would have long since regained her cultivation of a mere foundation establishment stage. However, she was still in the qi refining stage. Lone Moon did not look at her again. He turned to the others and said, "Once you're ready, we can set off." With that said, he summoned his sword and pulled Xining into the air. "Exalted Master." Jilin looked anxious. Seeing that no one was paying attention to her, she could only look at Jianxing. "Brother." Jianxing took a look at her, held it in, and turned to fly away on his sword. The others followed, but Mushroom took a look at her and called out softly, "Little sister Jilin." "Mushroom." Fatty called her and pulled her away. Jilin still did not give up. She just followed behind them on her sword with a sad expression. Jianxing turned back to take a look. A moment later he turned back and continued to fly on his sword. Do you think that I was too heartless to those disciples? Lone Moon looked at Jianxing and asked. Jianxing was stunned. He shook his head and said, no, they were the ones who made mistakes and let down Master's expectations. Now, they are just returning to their original position. It's just that. He could not help but look back again. Then he said seriously, Jilin is my sister after all. Although I know that she can never return to the sect, I can't be completely heartless to her. He looked troubled, but there was no resentment in his eyes. It's good that you understand. Lone Moon nodded. This disciple could see clearly. There was no need for him to worry. Although she is no longer a disciple of the sect, there is no need to be too distant to her. It's good that you know your limits. Yes, Master. Lone Moon did not continue speaking. He continued to fly towards his destination. Xining, who was behind him, suddenly turned half her body from behind Father Niu and looked straight at Jianxing. Jianxing looked up subconsciously, only to see Xining giving him a big smile. He was stunned for a moment. His face was blank. But strangely, he suddenly felt a little flustered. Lone Moon and his disciples flew for 2 days. They finally arrived at Xuhang City. This was a relatively large city in the west. The note described the strange things that had happened in the city recently. A few months ago, the people in the city seemed to have collectively contracted a strange disease. They would inexplicably fall into a deep sleep at night. And everyone would have nightmares. They would only wake up in the morning. The locals thought that there was a demon causing trouble. They went to the seaside to seek help from immortals. In order to avoid alerting the demon, they disguised themselves as a merchant team entering the city to buy goods. Lone Moon found an inn to stay in and let them ask around. The 4 of them inquired around the city seriously. They only returned after sunset. They began to exchange their findings. I heard that the people here fall asleep every midnight. It seems that the demon only appears at night. But there is no remnant demonic aura in the city. It seems that it is not a demon. The people in the west said that this has been happening for 5 or 6 months. Not only do people fall asleep at night, but there are also people who fall asleep mysteriously during the day. That's right. The people in the east said that too. And those who fall asleep during the day will only wake up after 4 or 5 days. Some even need more than 10 days. After they finished talking, they all looked at Lone Moon in the middle. It was obvious that they had no clue. Did you go to see those people who were unconscious? Lone Moon reminded him. Jianxing finally spoke up. Master, I have gone to see a few of them. But there are no other abnormalities in their bodies. It looks like they are just sleeping. Yes. The oldest of the 4 also said, I have also used spirit chi to check their bodies. There is no trace of demonic aura invading them. Lone Moon nodded. Have you thought of any countermeasures? The 4 of them looked at each other before answering. We plan to wait until midnight tonight. After we have ascertained the situation, we will talk about it. Chapter 523. Then rest first, wait till midnight. Lone Moon announced the end of the meeting. The 4 of them got up and left one after another, returning to their own rooms. Seeing them go far, Fatty turned back and said, Master, although there is no demonic chi in this city, there is ghost chi. I'm afraid. I know. Lone Moon nodded. He could naturally see that the one in this city was not a demon, but an evil ghost. Just keep an eye on them and nothing will happen. It's good to gain experience. Fatty nodded, then got up and was about to leave with Mushroom. Lone Moon turned around only to see Xining sitting still, looking straight at him. What? Supper? Not today, let's go. He missed chef every day. Xining had to take out the pastries in the bag, eating as she went out. All right. Lone Moon suddenly thought of something and added, Xining, at night you better not. Before he finished, he saw that she had gone far away. He could only take back his words. Forget it, it was just an evil ghost. The one in this city was not a demon. From the moment they entered the city, he could see it. That was an evil ghost that fed on human vitality, and it was very likely to be promoted to a ghost king soon. The reason why the people in this city were unconscious was because part of their vitality was sucked away. Ghosts were actually easier to deal with than demon spirit beasts, of course, if they could be found first. These disciples had never come into contact with ghosts and spirits. It was normal that they could not figure out what it was. As long as they kept calm, they would not be controlled by the evil ghost. With Shen Ying's ability, even the most powerful evil ghost would not be able to capture her. After all, she was the person who had beaten the Ghost King to tears. So if anything happened to anyone, she would definitely not trouble my ass. For all? Where is she? Lone Moon looked at the empty room, 10,000 horses galloping in his heart. Fatty was also confused. I didn't see Miss Shin come out? Find her. Quickly. He should not have let down his guard on that person with no sense of direction. Yes. Fatty was about to go out when he suddenly heard the sound of a bell ringing in his ear. The sound was simple and distant, instantly spreading throughout the entire Tsuhong city, drilling straight into everyone's ears. For a moment, they only felt that their divine sense was shaken, as if something was about to leave their bodies. The four disciples hurriedly circulated their spiritual qi to protect their heart meridians before they could suppress that feeling. Suddenly there was a clang at the door. Ji Lin, who had followed them all the way here, had fallen at the entrance of the inn downstairs. There was a trace of blood at the corner of her mouth, and there was a faint sign that her soul had left her body. Little Lin. Jian Xing was shocked and directly jumped down from the building. He helped the person on the ground up and separated a bit of spirit qi to protect her heart meridian. Only then did Ji Lin's expression look a little better. Brother? Ji Lin looked at the person in front of her with lingering fear. Suddenly, as if recalling something, she looked up at the people upstairs and said, That's right, exalted master, I saw Sister Shin on the street just now. I called out to her but she did not respond. It's like she's being controlled by something. Lone Moon was shocked. In a flash, he appeared beside her. Where did you see her? On the main street in front. She pointed outside. Lone Moon turned and rushed out, searching in the direction she pointed. The others hurriedly followed. Only when they came out did they realize that although it was pitch-black midnight, the streets outside were filled with people. Upon closer inspection, they realized that they were all residents of the city during the day. Without exception, all of them had their eyes closed, their faces numb. Like wandering souls, they walked in the same direction as if they were being controlled by something. There was no sound at all. A disciple mobilized his spirit qi to check their souls, but his face turned pale. Their souls are not in their bodies. The others were stunned. One by one, they pushed open the doors of the houses on the street and walked into the rooms, only to find that there were shadows lying on the beds. They were the souls of those people on the street, but their faces were in pain, as if they were experiencing some terrifying dream. Is that bell just now? Jian Xing said in a low voice. Their souls were shaken out by the bell. Something is controlling their bodies. Let's find Shining first. Lone Moon said in a low voice and flew up directly. He released his divine perception and scanned the dense crowd on the street. Only then did he realize that the familiar figure on the street was walking step by step with the crowd toward the city entrance. Upon closer inspection, there was a faint trace of ghost qi wrapped around her leg. There. Lone Moon flew down directly. With a wave of his hand, he dispersed the ghost qi on Shen Ying's leg. He stopped instantly. The others also chased over. Fatty subconsciously said, Strange, why would Miss Shin be affected by mere ghost qi, shu? Before he could finish, Lone Moon suddenly turned back with a nervous expression. He lowered his voice and said, Don't speak. Everyone was stunned and stood rooted to the ground. Did they think that something big had happened to Shining? Upon closer inspection, they realized that she was the same as the other unconscious bodies. Her eyes were also tightly shut, her face expressionless. Only, there was a faint sound of snoring. Fatty, Jian Xing, everyone, was she sleeping? Her soul did not leave her body at all. She was purely asleep. Before they could react, Lone Moon's serious voice transmission sounded in their ears. It was as if he was facing a formidable enemy. Go quickly move the blankets and pillows in her room over. Don't make any sound if you don't want to die. The disciples were dumbfounded, but they still obediently went back to move the blankets and pillows. Quick, bring them over to me. Be careful. Lone Moon took the blankets from their hands and took a deep breath. Then he carefully walked forward and carefully wrapped it around Shining. Then, very carefully, he carried her and gently placed her on the blankets that were laid on the ground. Every move was like a slow-motion replay. He even held his breath the whole time, for fear of making the slightest sound. Only when he put her back in the blankets did he let out a long breath and wipe the cold sweat off his forehead. Thank goodness, thank goodness. She didn't wake up. Father was scared to death. Onlookers, master. Jian Xing looked at the figures that had already walked out of the city. He could not help but send a voice transmission. The people in this city? Lone Moon turned back to look at them. Then he nodded and said, Go. If you encounter anything, try to stay far away. I'll stay here and watch Shining. Fatty, look after them. Yes, master. Fatty nodded and glanced at the 4 disciples. Then, together with Mushroom, they flew away with the crowd that was leaving the city. Jilin turned back to look at Lone Moon. Something flashed across her eyes. Then she hurriedly rode on her sword and followed. The few of them chased all the way out of the city. Outside the city, the sky was filled with white fog. The fog was so thick that they could only see about 1 foot around them. The few of them had no choice but to fly down to avoid being separated by the fog. Chapter 524. Let's gather together and follow this group of people. Jianxing instructed in a low voice. The others understood and nodded. That demon definitely had a purpose for controlling this group of people. If they followed them, they would definitely be able to find it. Fatty didn't stop them either. He just followed them from a distance. They followed the crowd for a long time. Suddenly, in the white fog in front of them, spots of light appeared, and there were faint sounds of people. Everyone was stunned. They quickened their steps and walked forward. They realized that it was actually the city gate of Tsuhong City in front of them. They had clearly followed the crowd all the way out of the city. Why did they turn back? And right now, inside Tsuhong City, it wasn't dead silent like when they left the city. Instead, it was brightly lit and noisy as if it was a festival. From time to time, children carrying lanterns ran across the streets, playing and playing. This situation was strange no matter how one looked at it. What's going on? The disciples were confused. Brother. Jilin subconsciously grabbed Jianxing's hand. Jianxing frowned. After a while he said, "Let's go in and see what's going on." The remaining 3 looked at each other and nodded. Then they all walked into the city. But Mushroom shook her head and refused to go. She said, "I don't like this place. It's very strange. Can we not go in?" They turned back to look at her. They hesitated again. But if they didn't go into the city, they wouldn't know what was going on. Sister Mushroom, don't be afraid. Jilin took a step forward. With an amiable look on her face, she advised softly, "Why don't you hold my hand? We will protect you." With that said, she even smiled at her with a gentle look on her face. But she clearly looked older than Mushroom, but she called her sister. It felt strange. Mushroom had a good impression of Jilin. She looked at her, hesitated for a while, but still held her hand and followed them in. Fatty frowned. Something flashed across his eyes. Demons were always more sensitive than humans. Unfortunately. He sighed and could only follow them in. The city was even more lively. The streets were brightly lit. Rows of lanterns were hung. Both sides of the road were filled with all kinds of stalls, selling their wares with all their might. It looked like an ordinary night market. The more they looked, the stranger they felt. But they couldn't tell what was going on. After thinking for a moment, he turned around and asked the person beside him, "Big brother, did something big happen today? Why is the city so lively?" The man looked up at him and said, "You must be from out of town. Our city has a night market every month. It has always been like this." "I see." The disciple's eyes darkened and he continued to ask, "Has anything strange happened in the city recently?" "Strange? What strange thing?" The man was stunned and glared at him with some dissatisfaction. "Our Tsuhong City is peaceful. Don't talk nonsense. Go, don't disturb my business." The disciple could only retreat awkwardly. Everyone else's expressions became a little more serious. Everyone in the city was clearly distressed during the day. Everyone in the city knew about the inexplicable lethargy, but why did this person seem to be completely unaware of it? "Brother, where did Master and the others go?" Jilin suddenly pointed to the front of the street and said, "When we left the city previously, he and Sister Shin, Master Shin were clearly here. I remember this street." Everyone looked around and realized that this was indeed the street they left the city on. But Lone Moon, who was originally nervously guarding Shining, was now nowhere to be seen. But they had only left the city for a quarter of an hour. Could it be that they returned to the inn first? Jianxing's expression darkened. "Let's go back to the inn and ask." So the group quickened their steps and returned to the inn earlier. But the strange thing was that the innkeeper didn't seem to recognize them. He thought that they were here to stay, and that Lone Moon and Shining weren't in the inn. The more they thought about it, the stranger they felt. They all looked at Jianxing, who had the highest cultivation. "Uncle Master Jianxing, what should we do?" He was Lone Moon's disciple, the same generation as Fatty, so everyone called him Uncle Master. "Let's split up first and ask around. We'll decide after we figure out the situation," Jianxing suggested. 4 hours later we'll meet here again. The few of them nodded and dispersed in all directions. Even Mushroom was pulled out by Jilin. Fatty didn't go out to ask around. Instead, he sat down in the inn and waited for them to return. 4 hours later they returned to the inn, but their expressions were not very good. I went to ask around. The people in the city seemed to have forgotten that they were unconscious. It's the same here. I even specially went to the few families that I asked around in the day. They even chased me out. These people seem to be completely different people in the day and at night. Could it be, this is just an illusion? These people are all fake? The few of them paled. If this was an illusion, then how powerful must the other party be to be able to replicate an entire city? No. Jianxing shook his head. They are indeed all people. They don't look like they were created by spells. Everyone was silent. They had no clue at all. Although they were unwilling, they could only turn to look at Fatty beside them. Exalted Master. Jianxing cupped his fists and said, "Please give us some pointers." Fatty smiled. Seeing that they were indeed stuck in a bottleneck, he reminded them, "This is indeed not an illusion but a dream." Dream. Everyone was shocked and looked at each other. Do you still remember what was written on that piece of paper asking for help? Fatty glanced at them before continuing. It said that at night, everyone will fall into a nightmare and only wake up in the morning. The place we are in now is their dream. Someone has taken control of their consciousness and entered the same dream. The few of them were stunned. No wonder those people completely forgot what happened in the day. They also forgot that they would fall asleep at night. After all, it was a dream. When they first saw the white fog, they were probably already pulled into the dream. But didn't they say it was a nightmare? Jilin asked doubtfully. I see that everyone is quite happy. It doesn't look like a nightmare? The other disciples thought so too. Fatty smiled and said, "Very soon it won't be." What? The few of them were stunned. Before they understood what he meant, they suddenly heard a scream. The streets suddenly became chaotic. People kept screaming. A group of people ran past them with panicked expressions. All of them ran back in a panic. What's going on? They stood up directly. The next moment they suddenly heard a loud roar. Roar. Chapter 525. Instantly the sound spread through the entire Tsuhong city, even the ground shook. The few of them walked out of the inn and saw that a huge monster had suddenly appeared outside the city gates. It was pitch black and it was impossible to see its appearance clearly. However, pairs of blood-red eyes were glowing as they stared at the city. It was extremely tall, almost twice the height of the city wall when it stood up. It waved its huge claws and slapped hard, pushing down the city wall. Terrified screams could be heard below the city wall. Is this the monster that is harming the city? The disciple subconsciously wanted to pull out the sword in his hand. Don't forget, Fatty reminded. This is a dream. The disciples paused and looked up at the monster in front of them. Could this monster be fake? But it clearly looked so real. Everyone's expression changed. For a moment they didn't know if they should attack. But the monster was getting closer and closer. It pushed down the city wall directly and was biting towards the panicking crowd. They could even smell the thick stench of blood coming from its huge mouth. The people in the city were frantically running around, but there were too many of them. They couldn't all escape and there were always a few who fell behind. So the monster bit down and instantly blood splattered. It was a ghastly sight. It even stretched out 7 or 8 octopus-like claws, entangling those who were running away and throwing them into its mouth one by one. There was a faint crunching sound of chewing. Everyone's hands tightened, and they desperately resisted the urge to attack. On the other side, something flashed across Jilin's face. She suddenly pulled out her sword and shouted, "I can't watch anymore. Even if it's an illusion, I can't bear to see this monster wantonly hurting people." With that said, she rushed over. Jilin. Everyone wanted to stop her, but it was too late. They watched as she flew over on her sword. She summoned a blazing flame and shot it towards the monster. Unfortunately, her cultivation was ultimately too weak. Not only did she not cause any damage to the monster, but she was also entangled by its claws. She was about to be eaten. Little Lin. Jinxing was shocked. He directly pulled out his sword and rushed over. The other disciples also rushed over and began to attack the monster. Jinxing even chopped off one of the enemy's tentacles and saved Jilin. Fatty took a look at them and shook his head. Indeed, they were lacking in experience. Under the joint attack of several people, the monster gradually lost the strength to resist. It suddenly let out a miserable cry and began to flee in the direction of the city gate. The few of them naturally wouldn't let it escape, so they all ran towards it. Jian Xing even summoned the sword array directly. Instantly, thousands of swords formed by spirit chi rained down from the sky towards the monster below. Instantly, the monster was nailed to the city gate. The monster let out a blood-curdling screech, and its huge body collapsed with a loud rumble. All the disciples heaved a sigh of relief, but before they could feel the joy of victory, a familiar roar came from behind them. Suddenly, another identical monster appeared behind them, slowly crawling into the gap in the city gate. What's going on? Everyone was shocked. Why would there be more? They had no choice but to turn around and continue to deal with this monster. However, these monsters seemed to be endless. After killing one, another identical one would immediately appear. It was as if they were deliberately trying to waste time with them. Only then did they start to recall Fatty's words. Did he stop them just now because he had already guessed that this would happen? He turned around to look at the panicking people in the city, but realized that although they were fleeing with all their might, none of them ran out of the city gate. It was as if they were trapped by something. Brother, look, what's that? Jilin suddenly pointed at the corner of the wall and said. Jian Xing turned around and saw that on the gap in the city wall that was just pushed down by the monster, there was a faint red glow, as if it was the glow of some sorcery. Without thinking much, he waved his sword and shouted to everyone, "There's an array on the city wall. Attack that city wall." Fatty, who was watching the battle below, paled. Stop. Unfortunately, it was too late. Jian Xing's sword was already waved towards the city wall. Although the other sorcery was a step late, it also deviated towards the city wall. With a loud rumble, a large piece of the city wall collapsed. In an instant, like dominoes being pushed down, not only the city wall but everything in the city also began to collapse. The originally brightly lit city began to distort and change shape, as if the whole world was disappearing. All the disciples were shocked. Before they could even see clearly what was happening, they felt their bodies become heavy and they fell straight down. In the next moment, their vision blurred, and they appeared on a piece of flat land outside the city. Around them stood those dazed people who had left the city previously. Everything was the same as when they had just left the city, as if they had never been to that brightly lit city at all. Could it be that their primordial spirits had also left their bodies just now? Before they could think carefully, they felt their primordial spirits becoming unstable. A gush of blood surged up and they all spat out blood. And in the next moment, the people who were originally standing around them suddenly began to collapse powerlessly. In a short while they were all lying on the ground. The few who were injured looked at each other. What was going on? But when they looked up, they saw Fatty with a solemn expression. Oh no! Fatty looked up at the sky that was already beginning to brighten. Those living souls in the city. He turned around and summoned his flying sword. Exalted Master, what exactly is this? All the disciples still looked confused, completely unaware of what was going on. Fatty glared at them somewhat angrily, then explained, "Have you all forgotten that the souls of the people in the city have all left their bodies? How are they going to return to their bodies if their dreams are directly interrupted?" Fatty said as he flew up on his flying sword. "All of you stay here and look after their bodies. Don't let that evil ghost come near." With that said, he turned and flew directly towards the city. At this moment in the city, Lone Moon, who was guarding a certain foodie who had woken up, looked up at the sky and immediately frowned. He got up and walked into a house next to him. On a closer look, indeed, the living soul lying on the bed began to become unstable, faintly showing signs of turning into a ghost. But his body still did not return. It seemed like it was too late. Lone Moon's expression darkened. Seeing that the sky was about to brighten, he walked out and conjured a seal with both hands. A large array appeared under his feet, instantly enveloping the entire city, temporarily suppressing the living souls in the city from dispersing. The next moment, the sun slowly rose. A certain someone who had slept soundly on the streets for the whole night also opened his eyes. At one glance, he saw the person sitting beside him with a face full of resentment. "Hey Father Nyo, good morning." "Morning my ass." Lone Moon directly rolled his eyes. "In the future before you sleep, you'd better tie a rope to the head of the bed." Even a mere gust of ghost chi could be drawn away. How deep was his sleep? Didn't he have any F***king idea how grumpy he was when he woke up? Chapter 526. Huh. Shining was confused. Only then did she realize that she was not lying where she slept last night. She blinked blankly. Forget it, she couldn't be bothered to think about it. It's not important. Lone Moon was about to scold her when Fatty flew back hurriedly. Master, the people in the city? He had just landed when he felt the array formation on the ground. He heaved a sigh of relief. Luckily, Master discovered it first. What happened? Lone Moon glanced at him. Didn't you go to catch the evil ghost? Why can't the people in the city return their souls instead? That evil ghost must have sensed danger, so it summoned the ghost fog and sucked them into the dream realm. Fatty said awkwardly. They accidentally broke the dream realm in advance. Those people's bodies did not return in time, so... Lone Moon's expression darkened. What was this? They were in cahoots with that evil ghost, weren't they? Master, time is pressing. I've already asked them to guard those people's bodies outside the city. Let these people's souls return first. Lone Moon nodded. Fatty then took out a gourd Dharma artifact and opened it. He conjured a seal while chanting. In a short while, living souls turned into streams of light and entered the gourd. It took him half an hour to collect the last bit of living souls and seal the mouth of the gourd. Let's go. Lone Moon flew up on his sword. You go too. He brought Shining with him. Shining? Where's breakfast? The bodies of the people in the city were not far from the city. From afar they could see the ground full of people lying on the ground. 3 disciples were guarding them. Seeing the 3 of them coming over, they immediately welcomed them with joy. Exalted Master, you're back. Fatty glanced at the 3 of them. Where are the others? Why are there only the 3 of you? Jianxing, Mushroom and Jilin were all gone. The trio's expressions changed. They exchanged a look before replying. Exalted Master, after you left, a malevolent ghost suddenly appeared. Master. Miss Jilin was caught by it. Uncle Master Jianxing and Mushroom both chased after her. Fatty's expression darkened. He turned to look at Lone Moon. Master, you stay here and help the people in the city return their souls. I'll go take a look with Shining. Lone Moon instructed. He pulled Shining and followed Jianxing's aura. The 2 of them did not fly for long before they suddenly felt their surroundings become unusually cold. In the mountain forest in front of them, a large amount of ghost chi had gathered. It occupied the entire mountaintop, and even sunlight could not penetrate it. Lone Moon frowned. Was it about to become a ghost king? He directly flew down and followed the weak auras of a few people to the entrance of a cave. Half of the cave entrance had collapsed as if someone had fought here. Looking at the remnant sword chi in the surroundings, it should be Jianxing. He summoned a sliver of immortal chi to cover his entire body, forcing the ghost chi to retreat. Subconsciously he turned around and said, Shining, the ghost chi here is too thick, you. Before he could finish speaking, he turned around and found that the ghost chi around them had already distanced itself from her. It was at least 2 to 3 meters away, even further than the ghost chi he had dispersed with his immortal chi. What? Shining tilted her head. I'm fine. I'm going in. Motherf asterisk her. She clearly had a dispelling buff. How did she get controlled by the ghost chi last night? They walked directly into the cave filled with ghost chi. The ghost chi inside was even thicker, but with every step Lone Moon took, the surrounding ghost chi was dispersed by the immortal chi. Although he could completely disperse all the ghost chi in this cave thinking of the people inside, he did not do so. The cave was very big and there were forks everywhere. It was like a natural maze. But this was not a difficult thing for Lone Moon. With a sweep of his divine perception, the situation of the entire cave was clear. He walked directly in the direction of the 3 people. The only thing he had to worry about was a certain person who had no sense of direction. This way. Oh. Lone Moon pulled back a certain person who had taken a wrong turn for the umpteenth time. They finally walked to the innermost part of the cave. The surrounding ghost chi was even thicker, mixed with the smell of blood. There were also faint sounds of fighting and waves of shrill ghost cries in front of them. It's right in front. Lone Moon quickened his pace and walked over. After a big turn, a blood pool appeared in front of him. There were a few corpses floating in it. Above the blood pool, a female ghost with a horrifying appearance and a face full of rotten flesh was fighting with Jianxing. That evil ghost was already a half-step ghost king. It was not weaker than a nascent soul cultivator, but the ghost chi on its body was a little weak. It seemed to be heavily injured. Obviously, it was interrupted at the critical moment of advancement and suffered a backlash. Jianxing was also injured quite a bit. His body was full of bloodstains and the wounds were still carrying ghost chi. Seeming to notice a stronger aura coming in, that evil ghost panicked and could not care much anymore. Instantly, it released all the ghost chi in its body and blocked Jianxing's attack. Its claws reached down and directly sucked up the blood in the blood pool. The original horrifying appearance began to recover. In a moment, it turned into a beautiful woman. The ghost chi on its body was instantly tens of times thicker. It was trying to forcefully advance. Jianxing's hand paused. He was shocked by the sudden increase in the opponent's suppression. Just as he was about to counterattack, that ghost king directly abandoned him and rushed towards Lone Moon and Xin Ying's direction. Master. Jianxing's expression changed. He directly mobilized all the spirit chi in his body and slashed with all his strength. In the next moment, that ghost king let out a sharp and piercing scream. It was hit directly. The ghost chi around it dissipated instantly. The body that had just gathered seemed to have broken and dissipated. But suddenly, a red light shot out from the center, rushing towards Xin Ying's direction. Be careful. Lone Moon subconsciously reminded. He was about to make a move. But he saw that the red light stopped. Xin Ying was holding it tightly with one hand. That red light struggled desperately in her hand like a loach. But no matter how hard it tried, it could not escape. It could only let out a series of sharp and piercing sounds. Alright, he would be retarded to worry about a cheat. Xin Ying grabbed that red light and looked at it curiously. She even flipped it left and right. That sharp sound became louder as if it was screaming. Exalted Master. The exhausted Jianxing also walked over. His face was pale. He must have gone through a tough battle. He looked down at the red light in Xin Ying's hand. This is the remnant soul of that evil ghost just now? It should be. Lone Moon nodded. Jianxing's eyes darkened. He said directly, this evil ghost has done many evil things. In order to prevent it from recovering, even if it is a remnant soul, we should destroy it as soon as possible. Lone Moon frowned and looked up at him. It is already a remnant soul. It can't recover anymore. If we continue to attack, it will only be destroyed. But Jianxing was stunned. His face was full of confusion as if he didn't know how to handle it. Chapter 527. Lone Moon took out a Dharma talisman and sealed it on Xin Ying's hand. Immediately, the red light went into the talisman. Bring it back to the mountain and use spirit chi to cleanse the malevolent chi on it. Then send it to Samsara. With that said, he was about to keep the talisman, but after some thought, he stuffed it into Xin Ying's storage bag. The immortal chi on him was too thick. He was afraid that he might accidentally destroy the remnant soul. It was safer to put it on Xin Ying. Yes, Master. Jianxing nodded. He glanced at Xin Ying and said nothing. Suddenly the ground shook. Without the support of the evil ghost's ghost chi, the mountain started to become unstable. This place is going to collapse. Let's leave quickly. Lone Moon reminded. Wait. Jianxing turned around. Mushroom is here too. He pointed to the side. Indeed, Mushroom was lying there, seemingly unconscious. Lone Moon went up and picked her up. He looked around but didn't see anyone else. He asked subconsciously, Where's your sister? Wasn't she captured? Jianxing's face paled. His eyes dimmed. He lowered his head with some sadness. Lone Moon understood instantly. It seemed that he was too late. He didn't know what to say. He sighed and didn't stay any longer. He set up an array and teleported them out. Before the four returned to the flat ground, they saw Fatty and the others rushing over. Master, have you dealt with that evil ghost? Fatty quickened his steps and walked over. But he saw the person he was carrying. Mushroom. What happened to her? Fatty hurriedly took her and examined her carefully. She was injured by that evil ghost and fainted. Lone Moon explained casually. That ghost is very good at absorbing souls. Her divine soul might be unstable. Fatty's expression changed. He hurriedly took Mushroom's hand and sent some immortal chi into her. Indeed, her primordial spirit was about to leave her body. He hurriedly cast a spell to help her stabilize her primordial spirit. Lone Moon turned to look at Jianxing behind him. He took out a recovery elixir and said, You're injured quite badly. Eat the elixir and rest here for a while. Thank you, Master. Jianxing took the elixir and ate it. Instantly, the wounds on his body began to heal. Instead, the other disciples looked behind them and seemed to realize that one person was missing. They couldn't help but ask, Uncle Master Jianxing, where's Miss Jilin? Why didn't she come back with you? Jianxing, who had just sat down, swayed a little. He clenched his fists by his side and said in a low voice after a while, I didn't make it in time. She was harmed by that evil ghost. Everyone's faces turned pale and they couldn't help but sigh. Especially that disciple who spoke earlier, he didn't know what to do. Though Jilin had already been expelled from the sect, she was, after all, a partner who had once cultivated together. Though she had made a mistake along the way, it was not a crime worthy of death. After all, there was still a bit of friendship, especially since she was Jian Xing's younger sister. The reason why Jian Xing trained harder than anyone else was partly because of this sister. As long as he finished his studies and went down the mountain, they would be reunited one day. It was a pity that the world was unpredictable. The scene quieted down. No one knew how to comfort him. Lone Moon sighed as well. In a low voice he said, "This time regarding the matter of the evil ghost, it was your misjudgment. That's why so much trouble has occurred. In the beginning, not only did you not recognize the cause of the trouble, you even shattered the dream realm in advance, causing the souls of the entire city to be unable to return." He glanced at these disciples. He had to admit that they were indeed inexperienced. If not for Fatty and I temporarily stabilizing those living souls, I'm afraid the citizens of the entire city would have been lost. Everyone lowered their heads in guilt. It was indeed their fault. They thought that something that could affect the entire city must be something like a large demon beast. Who would have thought that it was actually something like an evil ghost? That's why the entire city was almost harmed. After this incident, all of you need to know that no matter how powerful a cultivator is, he is not omnipotent. He can also fail miserably. You must not be arrogant and forget your original intentions. Originally, this matter was very easy to resolve. There was no need to wait until nightfall. All they had to do was find the ghost chi and destroy the nest. In addition, the yang chi was stronger in the day, so the evil ghost was easier to deal with than at night. But none of them noticed this. They didn't even notice the ghost chi in the city. Needless to say, he and Fatty were a little disappointed. "Yes, exalted master." All the disciples replied in unison. Lone Moon didn't say much either. After all, everyone was injured. Previously, they were forcefully pulled into the dream realm, and then they broke the dream realm and were ejected out in advance. Other than Fatty, who was prepared in advance, all of them were more or less injured. He thought for a while and took out the other 2 pieces of paper asking for help. Then he looked at everyone and made arrangements. "Fatty, bring Mushroom and Jian Xing back to the sect to recuperate first. Let the 3 of them deal with the next 2 places." Fatty looked at the heavily injured Jian Xing, then at the unconscious Mushroom in his arms. He nodded. "Yes, master." Jian Xing also recovered some of his essence chi and stood up. Fatty then took out a Dharma artifact and flew away with the 2 of them. In the next few days, Lone Moon wasn't in a hurry. He brought the 3 disciples and dragged Shining, who wanted to slack off all the time, towards the remaining 2 places. If they encountered other matters along the way, they would settle them along the way. What was surprising was that along the way they actually met other cultivators. But their cultivation levels were generally not high. Most of them were at the 1st or 2nd level of chi refinement. Lone Moon thought that the wealth he gave away earlier must have worked. Some people had already picked it up and started cultivating. They even met a cultivator who had just reached foundation establishment not long ago in a small town. He brought a group of people at the 1st or 2nd level of chi refinement and was about to deal with a 4th level demon beast. They even helped him along the way. After asking, they found out that the foundation establishment cultivator had picked up a book a few years ago and tried to cultivate it. He didn't expect it to really work, so he spread it out. Now, everyone in the town had started to cultivate it. Lone Moon expressed that he was very satisfied with the effect of giving away wealth. But without guidance, their cultivation was much more difficult. They searched towards the address on the paper. This time they didn't encounter any major problems. It was just 2 low-level demon beasts that caused trouble. The 3 disciples easily settled them and didn't cause any more trouble. But the state of mind of the 3 was still very obviously different from before. That unique air of arrogance about them also lessened. When they encountered danger, they were also more cautious. When they finished all 3 missions and returned to the sect, it was already 3 months later. The moment they entered the door, a gust of wind with sword chi blew over instantly. Then it directly stopped in front of Shining. "Master." A familiar voice sounded instantly, with a strong sense of joy and longing. "Hey, chef." Shining waved and greeted. "You're back. There's supper again." Chapter 528. Master. Chef stared intently at the person in front of him. His mind and eyes were filled with her figure. The hands by his side loosened and tightened several times, as if he wanted to do something, yet he was somewhat hesitant. Only his gaze became more focused, as if something soft was slowly flowing out from within. Lone Moon. He felt that it was the smell of dog food. "All right, everyone go and rest." He waved at the 3 disciples behind him. Don't eat dog food here. The 3 of them bowed and followed Lone Moon away quickly. However, they couldn't help but turn back and look at the 2 people in front of the mountain gate. These disciples rarely went to the back hall. In addition, I Ching had left the sect for many years, so they didn't know his relationship with Shening. They couldn't help but feel confused. Did they hear wrongly? Just now, they heard Exalted Master I Ching call Exalted Master Shen. Master? But they didn't look like master and disciple? Chef didn't move the whole time. Only when everyone left did he finally reach out and hug the person in front of him, so tightly that there wasn't a single gap. His warm breath, accompanied by his low voice, entered the bottom of her ears, faintly carrying a hint of grievance. Master, Master, sigh. Master, what? He just called her over and over again as if he didn't get tired of it. However, his voice became lower and lower. Master, Master, are you making up the number of words? Shining tilted her head. Chef was stunned for a moment. Then he hugged her even tighter. Only then did he change the sentence, but the feeling of grievance was stronger. Master, I miss you. I miss you very much, very much. Shining paused for a while, then reached out and hugged him back. Her face was a little hot for no reason. Even an old fox would be tempted by such straightforward words. So she couldn't help but reply, me too. Chef was stunned for a moment. The corners of his mouth began to rise uncontrollably on his usually expressionless face. He lowered his head and buried it in the hair behind her, hugging her even tighter. He hugged like this for a long time until Xinying's hands were a little sore. Can you cook now? As the saying goes, one can't forget one's roots. Not even as a chef. With Chef back, Xining finally returned to her wonderful life of eating 5 meals a day. Perhaps because Father Nyo limited her to 3 meals a day for too long, Xining actually felt a little full. Thus he went out for a stroll. He was going to the back of the mountain, but he ended up going to the front hall instead. 4 disciples were practicing their spells on the training grounds. Ever since they went out, the cultivation of the few disciples taught by the fatty had improved. One of them even directly broke through to the late-stage gold core. This was mainly because of the improvement of the state of mind. On the other hand, Jianxing's cultivation didn't improve much because he was heavily injured. It had been nurtured in the sect for a few months and now it was back. He was still the one with the highest cultivation among the 4. What's more, he had learned all the sword techniques that Father Nyo had taught him. He was already showing signs of developing sword intent. A few days ago, she heard Father Nyo bragging in front of Chef, saying that he should be the first to leave the mountain among the 4 of them. With his nascent soul cultivation, it shouldn't be a problem for him to establish a sect. Father Nyo already had the idea of letting him leave the mountain the last time they went out for experience. But he happened to be heavily injured and only came back to recuperate for a period of time. But it was only a few days away. After Lone Moon tested him again, he would let him go down the mountain. The first immortal cultivation sect in this plane was a sword cultivation sect. These few days, Father Nyo would come to show off occasionally. As if he had finally fulfilled some long-cherished wish of his. Xining glanced at the few of them and didn't care. Just as she was about to slip back, she saw a familiar figure sitting beside the training grounds, staring seriously at the 4 of them. She hesitated for a moment, then turned and walked over. Mushroom. She called out, but the other party didn't respond. She could only walk a few steps closer and directly sit beside it. Does this look good? Mushroom got a fright and turned to look at her. After a while she smiled and said, Xining, why are you here? I just walked and arrived. It was definitely not because she wasn't here and she got lost. She replied casually, why didn't you go to the back mountain to plant mushrooms? There was no one to lead the way. Huizhe said there's no need to plant mushrooms anymore, so I didn't plant them. Xining paused in the act of eating the pastries and turned to look at her. After a while she slowly responded, oh. She looked down at the little stool under her butt and continued to ask, are your injuries healed? She nodded hard. Huizhe helped me heal them, I'm fine now. With that said, she even opened her hand for her to look, her face innocent. Xining tilted her head and held her hand and really looked at it. How long did it take to heal you? I'll be fine in a month. She smiled even more happily. I'll be fine before you guys come back. Oh. Xinying's eyes narrowed. She patted the pastry crumbs on her hand and opened the bag to take out a bright red fruit. She handed it over. Want some? Mushroom's eyes lit up. She nodded like a chick pecking at grains. Yes. With that said, she nodded and took it over. She held the fruit with both hands and started munching on it. She quickly finished the fruit and turned back to look at her with sparkling eyes. She said sweetly, "Thank you." Xinying's eyes darkened instantly. She retracted her lazy aura. Wrong answer. Ha! Mushroom was stunned. In the next moment, Xinying suddenly reached out and strangled her neck. "You forgot to give me a card. Good person card. You." Before she could say anything, her whole body was lifted up by one of Yao Xi's hands. A terrifying aura instantly surged towards her. The other party's grip wasn't very tight, but she felt like she couldn't breathe. Boundless terror engulfed her. It was as if there was only one word left in her mind: death. Her voice resounded in his ears, enunciating every word. "Speak. Where's Mushroom? What are you doing?" Before the other party could answer, the practicing disciples had already surrounded them. The one in front was Jian Xing, still holding a practice sword in his hand. What are you trying to do?" Jian Xing glanced at Xinying and looked worriedly at the person in her hand. There was even a hint of nervousness in his tone. "Hurry and let go of Miss Mushroom." The other disciples all spoke up. "Exalted Master, Exalted Master, Mushroom's injuries have just healed. If she really offended you in any way, please don't hold it against her." "Yes, Exalted Master. Mushroom may be a demon, but she's a good one. Can you let her go first?" Chapter 529. Xinying didn't even look at them, but her expression darkened. She said word by word, "I'll ask again, where's the mushroom?" All the disciples were stunned. What did she mean? Wasn't it the mushroom in her hand? Jian Xing couldn't hold it in anymore and attacked with his sword. "Exalted Master, sorry?" He raised his sword and swung it at Xinying's hand that was holding the mushroom. A sword light was about to hit her wrist. Suddenly, another sword chi rushed over from the side and broke Jian Xing's move, even sending him flying and crashing into the ground with a bang. In the next moment, Yi Qing's figure appeared beside Xinying. Obviously he was the one who released that sword chi. Lonmun's voice sounded from behind. "What are you doing? Master, are you alright?" Yi Qing scanned Xinying up and down with some panic. Not finding anything wrong, he then turned to look at the person on the ground. In an instant, overwhelming sword aura gushed out and swept towards the front. The entire martial arts arena began to crack inch by inch. Jian Xing, who was on the ground, was pressed into the ground. All the meridians in his body ruptured and he became a bloody man instantly. Even the other 3 disciples knelt down and vomited blood. Even their primordial spirits looked like they were about to be crushed. "Chef, calm down." Lone Moon spoke in time, trying to stop the person who was about to lose his temper. But Yi Qing didn't move until Xinying also shouted, "Chef." Only then did he retract the sword chi all over his body. Everyone then felt their bodies relax. In less than 2 breaths' time they actually felt like they had escaped from death. Their faces were full of shock. What kind of powerful sword chi was this? "Fatty, go and take a look." Lone Moon turned and instructed. Fatty hurriedly walked to the center of the martial arts arena and helped Jian Xing up, who was like a bloody man on the ground. He stuffed an elixir into his mouth and used immortal chi to repair his meridians. If he had been one step later, he would have become a cripple. "Senior brother?" Only then did Jian Xing open his eyes and take a look at Fatty. He finally recovered. Yi Qing looked over again, the sword chi on his body about to burst out at any moment. "Chef, wait a moment. Ask clearly first." Lone Moon hurriedly pulled her back and looked at Jian Xing over there. His expression darkened. "What exactly happened? How could you point your sword at Xinying?" Jian Xing pressed a hand to his chest and looked at Xinying. There was some anxiety on his face. After a while he said, "She wants to kill Mushroom." Lone Moon turned back and realized that Xinying was carrying a person in her hand. It was Mushroom. But at this moment, his face was pale as if he was about to be strangled to death. "Mushroom?" Fatty panicked. He dropped Jian Xing and walked over quickly. "Xinying?" Lone Moon paused. What was going on? Didn't she like mushrooms? The kind where they could share the fruits. Xinying had no intention of replying at all. She continued to look at the man in her hand. "Where did you hide the mushroom?" "What do you mean?" "What hidden?" Lone Moon stopped mid-sentence, suddenly understanding something. His eyes widened, he conjured a seal and slapped Mushroom's forehead. A moment later, a translucent soul popped out of the mushroom's body. It was dressed exactly the same, but its face was completely different. Furthermore, it looked somewhat familiar. "Jilin." The 3 disciples exclaimed in unison. Even Lone Moon was stunned. When did Mushroom get possessed? They did not see any signs of possession on her body. She's Jilin. Where's Mushroom? Fatty was also confused. He was the one who treated Mushroom's injuries, but he did not notice anything different. Jilin panicked. She turned and wanted to float away, but Xining let go of Mushroom's body and grabbed her translucent soul again. She did not even change her hand. Still not going to talk? Xining tightened her grip. Jilin's translucent soul started to crack like broken glass. Jilin felt an indescribable pain. She let out a shrill scream. No, don't. It's already been eaten by the evil ghost. I didn't harm her. Don't kill me. No. Jian Xing shouted. She didn't do it on purpose. Don't hurt her. Lonman's expression darkened. He turned to look at Jian Xing. You knew from the beginning. Jian Xing paled. A moment later he said in a low voice, that day the evil ghost captured both of them at the same time. By the time I arrived, Mushroom's soul had already been eaten by the evil ghost. He looked up at Jilin and Xinying's hand and continued, after I rescued little Lin's soul, I realized that her body had already been eaten by the evil ghost. I could only attach her to Mushroom's body. He struggled to kneel on the ground. He looked at Lone Moon and said, Master, I was anxious to save her. I was also afraid that you would misunderstand Jilin. That's why I did not tell you the truth. Please forgive me, Master. Lone Moon frowned. Possession was a heinous crime, but given the circumstances he really did not have much of a choice. Otherwise he might not have been able to save either of them. Even he could not say that what he did was wrong. But, is that so? Xining suddenly spoke. Her gaze turned cold. Mushroom is really dead? Everyone was stunned. What did she mean? Xining suddenly raised her other hand and reached toward Jilin's head. What are you trying to do? Stop. Jilin was shocked. No matter how hard she tried, she could not escape from Xinying's palm. In the next moment, the same intense pain attacked her again. This time it was more intense than before. Only last time, it was the pain of her soul being torn apart. Xining was indeed tearing her soul apart. She grabbed one side of her soul and pulled it apart. Help save me, brother. Little Lin. Jian Xing tried to crawl over but he fell to the ground weakly. He could only glare at Xining and watch as she forcefully split Jilin's soul into two. The originally translucent soul became even more translucent. But it was now divided into two figures. One still looked like Jilin while the other, Mushroom. Fatty cried out in shock. It was not just the few people present. Even Jian Xing, who was on the ground, had a look of disbelief on his face. How could this be? Why was Mushroom's soul in Jilin's body? Fatty stepped forward and took the translucent soul from Xinying's hands. He called out a few times but there was no response at all. How could this be? She lost her primary soul. This is only one of her souls. Lone Moon took a look and saw the problem. A soul that had lost its primary soul had no sentience. That was why there was no response. Chapter 530. Lone Moon turned to look at Jilin, who was still screaming in Xinying's hands. You swallowed Mushroom's soul on purpose. That soul of Mushroom might have contained her memories, which was why she could hide it for so long, even fooling Fatty. This was also why they could not tell that Mushroom had already been possessed. Mushroom wasn't devoured by the evil spirit on its own. You did it, didn't you? No. I don't know. Jilin kept struggling. Perhaps it was because of the pain of her soul being split, or the guilt of being discovered. She started to speak without thinking. I just wanted to come back. Everyone's faces darkened. They looked at Jilin in disbelief. If she had done this on purpose, then some things were not just coincidences. Including the fact that her soul had just left her body and she had just lost her soul. They could not help but think back to what they had experienced. They could not help but guess that she had always been at the foot of the mountain. Xuhang City was not far from here. Perhaps she had. At that moment, all the disciples felt a chill down their spines. Even Jian Xing's face was pale. He looked shocked. Lonman's eyes darkened. He raised his hand and dissipated the life force around Jilin's soul. Her originally transparent soul began to reveal traces of black. That was Ghostji. She was no longer a living soul. She was a real ghost. He set up a reincarnation array. He looked at Xining and said, "Send her into samsara." Xining frowned. She tightened her grip. With a few cracking sounds, a few more cracks appeared on the soul. Then she threw it into the reincarnation array. Jilin swallowed Mushroom's soul. Naturally, she had to give up one of her own. Now that Shining had taken it out, her soul was no longer complete. Coupled with those cracks, even if she reincarnated, she would not be a complete person. There would always be something missing. Lone Moon sighed. He turned to look at Mushroom beside Fatty. She was even worse off. She only had one soul left. He did not know how long she would have to stay in the river of forgetfulness for a chance to reincarnate. After all, even her primary soul had been swallowed by that evil ghost. Wait. Evil ghost? Lone Moon paused. Suddenly he recalled something. Shining, where's the remnant soul from the evil ghost? Shining stared blankly at him. A moment later she said, "Oh, it's here." As he spoke, he took out the talisman from the bag and tore it to release the remnant soul. A red light floated out from the talisman and formed a red ball. It carried an eerie ghost chi. After a few months, the remnant soul in Xinying's body had actually grown a little bigger. Strangely, it did not take the opportunity to escape. Instead, it floated obediently in front of Shining. Lone Moon took a closer look and realized that the remnant soul was filled with the demonic aura of an evil ghost. There was no aura of a mushroom at all. Could he have guessed wrongly? Just as he was thinking, Shining handed the red light to I Ching. "Chef, fire?" "Yes, master." I Ching turned his palm. Without any hesitation, a true phoenix fire appeared and surrounded the remnant soul. In the blink of an eye, the baleful chi and ghostly chi all disappeared. Only then did I Ching retract his hand. The originally fiery remnant soul slowly turned into an ordinary white transparent state, and slowly began to transform into a human form. Mushroom. Fatty was delighted. He was the first to recognize it. He did not expect that the remnant soul of the evil ghost was wrapped around Mushroom's main soul. Lone Moon heaved a sigh of relief. No wonder after that evil ghost died, this remnant soul flew towards Shining. It was not trying to escape, but Mushroom was asking Shining for help. He directly combined Mushroom's main soul and the remnant soul in Fatty's hand into one, and put them back into her body. Indeed, in a short while, Mushroom opened her eyes and looked at Fatty with some confusion. Wuxia. Suddenly she seemed to recall something. Her face was full of fear. "Jilin, she wanted to eat me, Wuxia. It's all right, it's all right." Fatty comforted her and transferred a bit of immortal chi over. Only then did she calm down. She seemed to be exhausted. Slowly she closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep. Although her main soul had returned, she had lost 2 souls and 6 spirits after all. It was already not easy for her to be awake for a short while. But as long as the main soul was there, the other spirits could be nurtured back. Lone Moon took a look at Mushroom, then turned to look at Jian Xing. His expression darkened instantly. Only then did he walk over. To Jian Xing's expression was complicated. He seemed to have not recovered from what had just happened. He was at a loss and flustered. "Jian Xing, do you know your mistake?" Lone Moon looked at the person in front of him, his eyes full of disappointment. But Jian Xing was the disciple that he had taught the most diligently in all these years. Although he was not the most outstanding, he had the highest expectations of Jian Xing. Unfortunately, the higher the expectations, the greater the disappointment. "Master." The panic in Jian Xing's eyes deepened. "Please forgive me, Master. I did not know that little Lin would do such a thing." Seeing that, the other 3 disciples also knelt down and began to plead for mercy. "Exalted Master, although Uncle Master Jian Xing is Jilin's brother and sister, it is understandable that he did not know the inside story." "Yes, Exalted Master. He who does not know is not guilty. Jilin was not that kind of person in the first place. No one would have thought that she would purposely take over someone else's body." "Exalted Master, although he was negligent, please forgive him this time on account of the fact that he was wholeheartedly dealing with the evil ghost." Even Fatty frowned and added, "Master, since Jilin has been executed, justice has been served to Mushroom." After all, Jian Xing was the only sword cultivator that Master had put in so much effort to teach. And he was about to leave the mountain to establish his own sect. He was angry about what happened to Mushroom, but he could not bear to see Master's years of hard work go to waste. Lone Moon's expression darkened even more. The hand by his side tightened its grip on his fan. Taking a deep breath, he turned to look at Shining and Chef. "What do you think?" Chef did not speak. The anger on his face had not dissipated. It was obvious that Mushroom and whatnot should be put aside. Just based on what he did to Shining just now, this person was already a dead man in his eyes. Shining, on the other hand, raised her head and looked straight at Lone Moon. After a while she said, "You can decide." You don't have to listen to other people's opinions, including mine. Lone Moon was stunned for a moment. Then his expression softened a little. He continued to turn to look at the person on the ground and asked word by word, Jian Xing, apart from helping Jilin to take over your body, do you really know nothing about her plot? Jian Xing paused. After a while, he still nodded and said, I really don't know. Jian Xing. Lone Moon took a deep breath and then let out a long sigh, as if he had finally let go of something. You disappoint me too much. Jian Xing panicked. Suddenly, he had the illusion that he was about to lose something. Frantically, he reached out to the corner of Lone Moon's robe. Master. Chapter 531. But Lone Moon took a step back and dodged his hand. Now that things have come to this, you still don't know how to repent? You said you didn't know Jilin's plot at all, but why did you have to kill that evil ghost back then, even to the last remnant of her soul? That day when Shining caught that remnant soul, he had suggested to completely destroy that remnant soul. His face paled and he couldn't speak. As a cultivator, you should know that even if it's an evil ghost, purifying it and sending it into samsara is the best solution, but you didn't do that. Lone Moon said in a low voice, directly exposing his thoughts. With your cultivation, a half-step ghost king can't hurt you like that, unless that evil ghost was forced into a corner by you and had no choice but to make you pay at the cost of her soul dissipating. He couldn't speak, but his body started to tremble. You said you didn't know about Jilin's plot beforehand, I believe you. But after you helped Mushroom resurrect her soul, you should have long discovered the truth, but you still chose to kill that evil ghost. Lone Moon looked straight at him. Did you really do this just to get rid of the evil and not to help Jilin hide the truth? Jian Xing's body swayed, and he directly sat on the ground, his face ashen. Wrong is wrong. If you had taken the initiative to confess from the start, I might have let you off. Lone Moon closed his eyes and said with some fatigue, Jian Xing, you really disappoint me. Master. He suddenly raised his head and looked at him with a complicated expression. Then teach me, what should I do? She's my sister, my only family. If I don't help her, am I supposed to watch her become a wandering ghost? Then you can bear to let Mushroom's soul dissipate. Jian Xing's expression became more and more stubborn, as if he was staking it all on one throw. He smiled and said, everyone has their own selfish motives. I chose to save my own sister, is that wrong? There's no such thing as right or wrong in this world, it's just different standpoints. Besides, wasn't Master the reason why little Lin became like this? What did you say? Lone Moon frowned. Isn't that so? Jian Xing said with a mocking smile. You took her into the immortal sect and let her see a wider world, but then you abandoned her. How could she not be resentful? Everything she did was for the sake of returning. What wrong did she do? Lone Moon's frown deepened. Who in this world is completely selfless? However, the more he spoke, the more energetic he became, as if he wanted to pour out all the words he had suppressed for so many years. Even if you're master, you're still the same. Do you think that helping the wicked is purely selfish? Lone Moon laughed coldly, and the last bit of pity in his heart disappeared. Isn't that so? Lone Moon thought that Lone Moon was going to deny it. He pointed at Shining and said, isn't she your selfish motive? She's clearly useless, she can't even abstain from eating, but you protect her all the time and favor her. You can't tolerate others talking bad about her just because Jilin offended you, you expelled them from the sect. She can eat spirit fruits that are 100 years old, she can take spirit herbs that are 10,000 years old, and she can waste the inner cores of high-level demonic beasts as she pleases. Yet, he wasn't willing to give a single cent to his sect's heavily injured disciple. What? Isn't it because of Master's selfishness? I Ching couldn't take it anymore. He even summoned his sword, but Shining stopped him. Fatty's face was black, and Father Nyo's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. Shining, on the other hand, looked like she didn't care. She was still chewing on her fruit leisurely, as if the person being accused was not her. In order not to wake her up from her sleep, you abandoned the evil ghost and put the whole city in danger. The more he spoke, the more agitated he became. The way he looked at Shining was like knives were about to fly out. It was he who gave Jilin the chance to take over her body. If I'm wrong, you guys are the same. Are you done? Lone Moon's expression was frighteningly calm. There was even a faint smile on his face. Is this what you really think? You always thought that Jilin was expelled from the sect because I was selfish and sided with Shining? Yes. He nodded directly. If not for Master favoring her based on her capabilities, how much do you know about her capabilities? Have you experienced it? Lone Moon interrupted him directly. Jian Xing was stunned as if he didn't understand what he meant, but Lone Moon's smile deepened and became colder. Then let me tell you. Me, Chef, Fatty and even everyone here combined would not be enough to deal with Shining with one hand. He scanned everyone present and said word by word, not only that, if she wanted the survival of the entire human continent to her, it would only be a matter of a single thought. Do you still think that's just my selfish motives? There was a sudden silence. Even Jian Xing's expression was one of disbelief. I didn't wake her up from her sleep because none of you could bear the consequences of waking her up. Isn't it because her cultivation level is low that she never bickers with you? That's because your levels are too low. You can't reach her. Do you really think that her title as sect master is undeserved? No, impossible. Jian Xing looked at Shining, still in disbelief. What do spirit fruits, spirit plants and inner cores have to do with you? Don't find excuses for your greed. You just think that because Mushroom is a little demon, it's more important for Jilin to be alive? You think that because Shining is immortal, her resources should be distributed to others? At the end of the day, your so-called reason is just to bully the kind and fear the evil. Jian Xing's face paled again. He looked lost as if something had been broken. Jian Xing. Lone Moon looked at him seriously and said, it's true that everyone has selfish motives. You chose Jilin and gave up on Mushroom. That's not entirely wrong. There is indeed no right or wrong in this world, but there is definitely evil and good in this world. He raised his hand and conjured a seal. My invincible sect does not need disciples with evil intentions. Oh, Master. Great fear flashed across Jian Xing's face. He turned and crawled towards Lone Moon. But Lone Moon did not stop. He conjured a seal and destroyed Jian Xing's dantian. In the next moment, all the spirit chi in his body faded. Even the nascent soul in his sea of consciousness dissipated. His youthful appearance also changed visibly. He became about 40 years old. Jian Xing looked at his own hands, his eyes full of fear. Master. He looked up and wanted to beg for something. But Lone Moon pointed at his glabella. The experience of going up the mountain to learn Tao is the main cause of Jilin's change. Then erase this memory as well. Jian Xing's eyes widened. Before he could resist, he felt a wave of dizziness and fainted. Chapter 532. Send him down the mountain. Lone Moon turned to look at the remaining 3 disciples. Yes, exalted master. The 3 of them then went forward to lift the person on the ground, turned around and retreated. Fatty carried Mushroom as well. Master, I'll bring Mushroom down first. Yes. Lone Moon responded, but his eyes were still looking at the messy martial arts arena. His expression was dark and no one knew what he was thinking. However, the surrounding air became heavy. Shining exchanged a look with Chef, then took 2 steps forward and stood beside him. Shining even took out a plate of pastries and handed it over. Father Nyo wants some? I'm not eating. Shining stuffed it into her mouth. For a moment, the entire arena fell silent again. Only the sound of Shining chewing on the pastries could be heard. After a long time, seeing that the pastries were almost finished, Lone Moon's mouth twitched. Finally, he could not help but say, can't the 2 of you comfort me? Father Nyo, what do you want to hear? Shining asked. How would I know? Can't you see that I'm in low spirits? All right. Shining sighed. Father Nyo, you have so many students. There are bound to be 1 or 2 who can't graduate. Relax. Master is right. Chef replied casually, you've taught so many people, there's bound to be a group of people who can't become sword cultivators. You call this comforting? This was more like throwing stones into a well. If Father Nyo really can't bear to let her go, it's not a big deal to call her back. There were indeed too few people who were born with a sword embodiment. Besides, although Jian Xing made a mistake when it came to his sister, he didn't have any other shortcomings. It wasn't like he couldn't change it. No. He frowned and said, even if there is a shortage of sword cultivators in this world, I cannot tolerate someone with such evil intentions like him going there to teach. But everyone has their flaws. I know. Lone Moon turned to Shining and said, what I can't forgive is not that he always protects his sister, but that he has evil intentions towards innocent people. What did Mushroom do wrong to have to pay the price for Jilin's selfishness? Jian Xing clearly knew that Mushroom was innocent, but he still helped Jilin take over her body, and helped her plan her retreat. If he had said it at that time, it was not as if there was no other way. But he didn't. If he treats the people he knows like this, then what will he do when he sets up his own sect and no one restrains him? Lone Moon sighed. Of course I know that no one is perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. I've taught him for so many years and I was just about to finish my apprenticeship, but because of this matter, I failed. This matter concerned the entire human race, so it was indeed not worth it. However, I cannot ignore the truth just because of his importance to the human race. If I let him go, then who will let Mushroom go? Who could she talk to about her reasoning? If everyone gave up the truth for the sake of greater benefits, then the world would be in chaos. This world is too scary. I just feel that there is no right or wrong in the world and it is difficult to distinguish between good and evil, but at least there is fairness, right? He said this so seriously that even I Ching looked at him with some surprise, as if it was the first time he met him. Was this still the profiteer from before? Shining suddenly laughed out loud. She patted his shoulder with a rare look of sincerity. Father Nyo, good job. Why did she suddenly praise him so seriously? You did it? What? Lone Moon was stunned. In the next moment, he heard a rumble of thunder from above, and the sky suddenly darkened. Looking up, he saw that the sky was filled with layers of thunder clouds covering the entire sky. It was not just nearby. He subconsciously released his divine perception to scan, and found that the entire human world, no. It should be said that the entire plane was like this. Thick thunder clouds appeared in every part of the sky of the entire plane. It was clearly a clear sky just now, but now it was all pitch black with thunder clouds. Only the clouds occasionally revealed the light of various colors of lightning. The thunder clouds were extremely thick. They looked like tribulation clouds, but they were different. Especially above the clouds, there seemed to be something huge forming, like a huge invisible net covering the entire plane. That thing was familiar yet strange, invisible and yet everywhere. Lone Moon even felt that it was close to him. This was nomological power. Before Lone Moon could react, the transmission amulet beside him suddenly lit up. Hong Meng's excited voice sounded from it. Lord, did you see it? It's the heavenly Tao. The heavenly Tao is born. Look at the sky, it's the heavenly Tao. Finally born. That's great. Sob, sob, sob. This world finally has a heavenly Tao. Ha ha. Wah. Hong Meng cried and laughed at the same time. He was so excited that if he was not careful, he would drill through the transmission amulet. His voice was so noisy that it gave Lone Moon a headache. Lone Moon was also a little confused. He looked up at the sky and once again sensed the layers of tribulation clouds above. That newly born nomological power. Almost instantly, the nomological power above responded to him, as if it was very welcoming of his visit, with a hint of excitement. It was really the heavenly Tao. Why was it suddenly born? They didn't do anything? Something like the heavenly Tao, shouldn't it be like a constitution, something that needed to be discussed one by one? After a period of practice, could it finally be confirmed? Shining, the manager, hadn't done anything yet. Could it be that he had overlooked something? Let him recall what happened just now. It seemed that he only said one sentence. Fairness? He only felt his heart skip a beat. His hand tightened and he directly crushed the transmission amulet in his hand. Hong Meng's ghostly cries finally stopped. Only then did he turn to look at the master and disciple beside him. His expression darkened like a storm was approaching. The two of you'd better tell me honestly. What exactly is going on? The two of them stiffened at the same time and turned their eyes, one to the left and the other to the right. What is Father Nyo saying? I don't understand at all. Yes, Father Nyo, how can we tell you? Pretend. Continue pretending. Lone Moon pointed to the sky. This heavenly Tao was born because of me, right? I'm just *King assistant, not even from this plane. Where did I get such great authority? Congratulations, Father Nyo. Shining turned and took out a piece of paper and stuffed it into his hand, as if she had prepared it for a long time. You've been promoted. From now on you're the manager of this plane. Clap. With that said, the master and disciple clapped their hands together and let out a series of awkward applause. He subconsciously looked down, only to see that there was an additional A4 paper in his hand. On it was a row of eye-catching big words, Plane Transfer Certificate. Lone Moon. Motherf *****. Chapter 533. 3 hours later. So, the heavenly Tao was really born because of me? Lone Moon tried his best to suppress the anger in his heart and said word by word through gritted teeth. You're the manager. Your thoughts are the rules of heaven and earth. I Ching nodded. You already knew? Lone Moon looked at Chef. His eyes were like ice knives stabbing at him. Chef faltered. Should he say that he knew or didn't know? Which means? Lone Moon's hand tightened. His fan cracked and almost broke. You've been so obedient recently because you're working together to trick me into getting on board. Father Nyo, don't worry about such details. Getting promoted is a good thing. Details my ass. How was this a detail? This kind of job with no salary, no insurance, no rest 24 hours a day, how is it a good thing? That made so much sense that she had nothing to say. One plane is enough to worry me. Do you think it's fun to throw another one over? He turned to glare at Shining. And Shining, you're just freaking lazy. You're all prodigals who depend on me. How dare you add more work for me? As expected, he still flipped out. Father Nyo was so scary. The two of them hugged each other and trembled. You two still dare to show off your affection. Shining, I Ching, they immediately separated and hugged themselves. They lowered their heads and tried to reduce their presence. Anyway, I'm not taking this plane. You can throw it to whoever you want. Lone Moon paced back and forth angrily. If you can't do it, return it to Hong Meng. I'm already busy enough with the previous plane. Who wants to take this rubbish? Then what if we don't care about the previous one? Shining asked weakly. Lone Moon stopped in his tracks. What do you mean? Shining was about to explain when a rumble of thunder came from the sky. The three of them stilled. The lightning clouds that had just dissipated began to gather again. But this time they only gathered on the mountain top and not the entire plain. And looking at the thick pressure of heaven and earth in the clouds, this was tribulation lightning? Master. Fatty hurried over and looked at the three of them. It's the sex disciples. They're going through the tribulation. It's the golden core lightning tribulation. So fast. Lone Moon paused for a moment. He did not expect that the first lightning tribulation would be here when the heavenly Tao had just been formed. Let's go take a look. The situation was urgent, so he had to go and take a look. When he reached the door, he paused and turned back to glare at the two. You two wait for me. This isn't over yet. With that he walked out. Shining, I Ching, after a long while. Master, how much food allowance do you think will be deducted this time? 3 months? Why did he feel that 3 years was a possibility? He wondered if he had saved enough food for the past few years. Lone Moon had just arrived at the front hall when he saw the three disciples standing on the platform in the middle with blank expressions on their faces. They looked at the spirit chi around them that had suddenly started to increase explosively, as if they had not reacted at all. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and meditate, the heavenly lightning is coming, Lone Moon reminded them loudly. The three of them were stunned. Only then did they sit down cross-legged. However, they still looked confused, completely unaware of the danger they were in. Lone Moon could not help but speak again. This is your tribulation and also a test for you by the heavenly Tao. After Golden Core, every major realm, the heavens will send down a lightning punishment. You have to use all your strength to deal with it, only then can you survive this tribulation. You cannot avoid it, you cannot bear it, and even your life will be in danger. If you succeed, your cultivation will increase. If you fail, you will die. Only then can you obtain the approval of the heavenly Tao, understand? A trace of panic flashed across the three's eyes, but they immediately calmed down and replied in unison, yes. Exalted Master. With that said, they began to prepare 120% of their energy. They mobilized their spirit chi and got into a defensive posture. The lightning tribulation in the sky was almost ready, and the surrounding spirit chi was getting thicker. Suddenly, 3 white lightning bolts, carrying with them the power of heaven and earth, broke through the clouds at the same time, heading straight for the 3 people below. Seeing that it was about to strike, Lone Moon also raised his head to look at the sky, intending to observe the first lightning tribulation of this plane. Suddenly, the lightning in the sky paused as if it had come to an emergency stop midway, and stopped with a click in the air. The white electric head seemed to have come to life. Suddenly, it bent in Lone Moon's direction, then turned back to look at the 3 people on the ground. Then it looked at Lone Moon, then looked at the 3 people on the ground. It bent back and forth a few times as if hesitating whether to strike or not. Even the nomological power around it seemed to be at a loss, as if asking for his opinion. The corner of Lone Moon's mouth twitched. The heavenly Tao really was born because of him. After a while, he gritted his teeth and said word by word, "Do your thing. Why are you looking at me?" Only then did the heavenly lightning strike the three people's heads. The first was the mental demon tribulation. The three of them instantly fell into the mental demon tribulation, and their expressions changed. But after all, it was only the golden core lightning tribulation, and they quickly regained their senses. Then the second and third lightning fell one after another. Every lightning bolt struck the people below with unerring accuracy. Not only did it not deviate, but even the extent of each lightning bolt in the sky was exactly the same. Even the pressure in each lightning bolt and the amount of electricity were not the slightest bit different. Lone Moon faintly felt that he was watching a standard demonstration of the lightning tribulation, the kind that a leader would perform while inspecting. Lone Moon's expression became darker and darker. If not for the fact that the heavenly lightning had not finished striking, he really wanted to go back and beat the asses of these two people. The lightning tribulation struck very quickly. A total of 81 lightning bolts struck, not one more or one less. The lightning tribulation in the sky dissipated completely, leaving only the surrounding rich spirit chi and a trace of the nomological power of heaven and earth revolving around Lone Moon, as if waiting for the leader to speak, not daring to disperse. Lone Moon took a deep breath and suppressed the irritation in his heart. Only then did he reply, "All right." That trace of nomological power dissipated. Faintly, there was the illusion that the other party heaved a huge sigh of relief. Fortunately, the leader was satisfied. Although the three people who were going through the lightning tribulation were all injured to varying degrees, the spirit chi in their bodies had become more condensed. This was the benefit of the heavenly lightning. As long as they passed the test of the lightning tribulation, the heavenly Tao was still kind to cultivators. Fatty checked their injuries one by one and found that none of them were particularly serious. Instead, their cultivation levels were showing signs of improvement. This could be considered as the heavenly Tao's compensation to them. After all, they had already formed their cores for a long time. Before the heavenly Tao was formed, the lightning tribulation was considered late. They could have just let it go, but now that they were already under the nomological power, the lightning tribulation still descended. Chapter 534. Fatty distributed some recovery elixirs to his disciples, then gave them some pointers on their cultivation, and told them about the heavenly tribulation in detail. Perhaps because they had personally experienced the pressure of heaven and earth, there was a hint of respect in their eyes. Due to their years of cultivation, they had unconsciously developed a sense of superiority, which unexpectedly dissipated a lot. If these three maintained their original intentions, it was not impossible for them to become great grandmasters in the future. Lone Moon nodded in satisfaction, then let Fatty bring them away. Thinking that there were still two little bastards waiting to be dealt with in the rear hall, he walked back. Only to find that Hong Meng, who should have been thousands of miles away, had appeared out of nowhere and was sitting inside. "Why are you here?" Lone Moon glared at him. "You left Rabbit there alone?" "Don't worry, Lord Lone Moon, Brother Rabbit is knowledgeable and eloquent, and most of those divine beings are already meditating, it will be fine alone." Hong Meng laughed. "What's more, I have nothing to do in Purple Night Palace, I'm really bored, the only thing I can help is at most to pass Brother Rabbit some carrots." "We've already done your work, of course you're fine." Lone Moon looked at him disdainfully. "I really don't know how you managed to become an ancient god, no wonder the plane was destroyed by you guys previously." Hong Meng felt like he was about to spit out blood, how could he not stab him? He felt so wronged he wanted to cry, but he had to maintain a smile. "You're right, Lord, isn't this all thanks to your help? I'm here specially to thank you for rebuilding the heavenly Tao." Lone Moon narrowed his eyes and scanned him from head to toe. "Do all your planes come empty-handed to express their gratitude?" Hong Meng stiffened, faintly feeling another stab in his chest. He had even moved his house and mountain over, what else did he want? What happened to being friends? This stab after stab was so heart-wrenching. "You came all the way here just for this?" Lone Moon glanced at him suspiciously. Hong Meng rubbed his hands, his eyes drifting, and after a while he said tentatively, "It's like this, now that the heavenly Tao has been established. The plane crisis can be considered completely resolved, but the different races living together is after all not conducive to the plane's development. So it's better to treat them separately. It's a pity that my magic power is weak. Moreover, I heard that the heavenly Tao was born because of Lord Lone Moon, so could you please help?" Scram. Before he could finish speaking, Lone Moon slammed the word into his face. Hong Meng was stunned. Why wasn't he playing by the rules? If you want to divide the world, do it yourself. I don't want to care about the matters of your plane. You don't even pay me a salary. Why should I indulge you? Father Nyo. I Ching could not help but take a step forward as well. He pulled Lone Moon over and whispered, "You're the manager of this plane now. If you don't do anything about it, this plane will collapse." While Hong Meng did not know about this, it was good to make him work for him. Lone Moon smacked him in the face. "You two master and disciple tricked me into accepting it, and now you're blaming me?" I Ching. "Master, I've tried my best." Shining could only carry the plate of pastries and move over, squeezing into their private chat circle. "Father Nyo, this matter is already settled. What's more, this company is already yours. You're already the boss. Naturally, there won't be any salary." Lone Moon's eyes narrowed. His eyes were filled with the light of wisdom that saw through all the traps. "You mean I don't have to work for you anymore?" "Oh, that's not it." He still had to continue raising his daughter. "Then what the hell are you talking about?" At the end of the day, he was still the one who worked himself to death. It was bad enough that he had to raise two little rascals in the past. Now even Hong Meng was involved. What the hell was this? He even brought along the burden of an entire plane. Father Nyo, who had changed his business model, was too difficult to fool. They suddenly understood the feelings of those who had been tricked by him before. Sigh. Shining sighed. Suddenly, she turned and stuffed the plate of pastries in her hands to Chef. She took a deep breath and reached out to grab his sleeve. Something on her body instantly dispersed. She blinked her eyes and bit her lower lip, revealing a crying expression. Her voice instantly rose and said with a hint of cuteness, "Father Nyo, are you really not going to take it?" "Of course not." Lone Moon subconsciously turned back. The words that were about to come out of his mouth were instantly stuck in his throat. He vaguely felt as if his heart had been hit by a huge object called cuteness. He could not control his hands. He wanted to throw away his integrity. After trembling for a long time, he barely managed to control himself. "Shit. Don't think of using the same method that you used on Xinjing to deal with me." He was someone who had been cuter than Littling after all. He could bear it. His head held up. He could not nod. "All right." Shining once again released all the laziness in her body. She kept Shinmeng back. "If you really don't want to take it, then forget it." "Master." I Ching was also shocked by Xin Ying's sudden action just now. He immediately sobered up and spoke up a little anxiously. "Forget it, Chef. Don't force Father Nyo." Shining gave a long sigh. She tilted her head and muttered in a seemingly unintentional manner, "But I've already transferred this plane. I have to find someone to take it. It's not easy to get the plane's recognition. Other than Father Nyo, I can't find anyone else. Why don't I just throw it to my big sister to manage? This place is also close to my side. She can still drop by from time to time." Lone Moon and I Ching's faces turned pale. They only felt a chill coming from the bottom of their hearts. They hurriedly interrupted her. "All right, I'll take it." He would take it, all right? Don't invite that big demon king over. Really? Really? Did he have any other choice? You're not forcing it? Not forcing it. Would be strange. But forcing it was still better than being beaten to death by the big demon king. He gritted his teeth. "All right, Father Nyo. Thank you for your hard work, Father Nyo." Father Nyo's promotion was thus happily decided. Shining patted his shoulder. She took the pastries from Chef's hands. "Want some?" "Get lost." "All right." Only then did the three of them reach a consensus. They ended the meeting and turned to return to the table. Yet they found Hong Meng looking at Shining with a dazed expression. Although he couldn't hear anything, he obviously saw something. He looked like he was swept by the Mo light wave tail. What was that just now? He suddenly felt his heart beating so fast. What was with this urge to rub something? His eyes subconsciously turned to look at Shining. "What are you looking at?" The two protective friends and relatives shouted back fiercely at the same time. "What has it got to do with you?" "No? I don't know what's going on either." "Holy shit, you dare to have a nosebleed." "Master, can I kill him?" Shining. Chapter 535. When the plane first opened, the three realms were all connected. Only when the heavenly Tao was established and the rules were formed, did the three realms begin to be divided. And what Lone Moon needed to do now was to divide the realms. Once the three realms were truly separated, the problem of the human race that Hong Meng was worried about would no longer exist. In addition to what Lone Moon had done previously, the teachings had already been passed down. Although the human race still could not defeat the divine race, they were no longer completely defenseless. Hong Meng explained to them the problem of how to divide the realms. If it was just a piece of land, it was naturally simple. It was like a flat piece of paper to be divided into 3 layers, one could just tear it apart. But dividing the realms was different. Although the 3 realms were separated, they were connected to each other. Otherwise, it would not be considered a complete plane. Like the previous plane, although the boundaries between the realms could not be crossed, there was still a realm gate connecting them. Then what do we do? Lone Moon frowned. They had to separate and connect them. Were they going to fold the plane? But wouldn't that crush the lower layers? This is very easy to solve. Hong Meng hurriedly said with some flattery. You just have to set up the original source purple gas, which is this plane's river of forgetfulness. But because there is no Mengpa here, I still have to trouble you to personally set up the river of forgetfulness. How to set it up? That ball of original source purple gas back then had now grown into a river and covered the entire plane. You just have to go to the center of the purple gas. Hong Meng hurriedly said. As long as you can help me and let it return to its original state, when the division of the 3 realms is complete, then it will be restored. Lone Moon pressed his forehead and sighed. There was no other way, the mess had already been taken care of. So he gave a few instructions to Fatty and pulled the 2 master and disciple along. Don't think of slacking off either. Then he set off with Hong Meng. The place that Hong Meng mentioned was actually from his Purple Night Palace. Alright, there was only Purple Night Plane left now. It was not very far. After all, it was the center of the entire plane. Hong Meng had gone through so much to revive his plane. Naturally, he was especially nervous about the original source purple gas and did not dare to live too far away. He had even used up half of his divine power to completely isolate the area to prevent ignorant gods from accidentally breaking in and causing damage. This was also part of the reason why he couldn't defeat the 12 gods. Along the way they encountered countless traps and arrays. Some of them even Hong Meng himself forgot about them and were almost trapped outside. It took him a lot of effort to break the array and enter. Lone Moon strongly condemned his unreliable behavior, and then scolded him for 2 hours. With great difficulty they finally reached the center of the origin purple gas. It was an unremarkable wasteland. It was so desolate that there was not even half a plant, let alone other creatures. However, in the eyes of these people, it was completely different. It was an endless expanse of purple, like a purple ocean, floating in the air, reflecting the entire world in purple. Connecting the purple sea were rivers of varying width and width. They extended in all directions and reached every corner of the plane. Lone Moon was shocked by the scene in front of him for a moment. He did not expect that the original source, which was the size of a well at that time, had become so big now. It seemed that Hong Meng had really been trying his best to protect it all these years. Lord, this is the center of the original source. Hong Meng said with a little pride. The corner of Lone Moon's mouth twitched. King want us to keep such a big ocean? Are you kidding me? How can I keep it? Of course we can't keep it directly. Hong Meng explained. The original source now is different from before. To completely control it we may have to go closer to the center. Then what are you waiting for? Let's go. Lone Moon urged. Alright. Hong Meng then continued to fly in. Their figures instantly disappeared into the large expanse of purple chi. The deeper they flew, the thicker the aura of the original source became. Apart from a sea of purple they could not see anything at all. Lone Moon followed behind Hong Meng. At the same time he had to release his divine perception to follow the center where the purple chi was the thickest. He did not know whether it was a good illusion or not. He kept feeling that the more he flew, the deeper the purple became. It gave him the illusion that it was getting darker. It was as if a monster that could support the heavens was pouncing towards them. Roar, holy shit. So it was not an illusion. It really was a monster. Lone Moon hurriedly pulled Hong Meng to the side and pulled Hong Meng back. In the next moment, a huge claw the size of a mountain directly slammed down from the side with a loud bang, causing a gust of wind to blow away the hazy purple gas in front of them. The wind was so strong that even Lone Moon could not stand steadily. What the hell is this? Lone Moon then saw clearly that it was a huge monster that was as tall as the sky. He could not even see its head. The lower half of its body was immersed in the original source purple chi. There were black and white circles around it like a zebra crossing. And those lines were constantly moving. There was no fixed pattern. Its whole body was surrounded by these 2 colors. He could not see its specific shape at all. Its whole body was also emitting an aura that he had never seen before. It was as if it did not exist in any plane. This is a beast of chaos. Hong Meng exclaimed, his face full of disbelief. What beast of chaos? Lone Moon asked. That is a monster that lives in the chaos. Hong Meng explained even more frantically. It must have come to this plane with the living beings of the plane. The chaos chi of those living beings nourished it. That is why it has been hiding in the original source of the plane. Why didn't you say such an important thing earlier? Things that came from the chaos were scarier than those that came from other planes. I don't know either. Hong Meng also looked anxious. If they let it stay here any longer, when it finished absorbing the chaos chi, it would attack the original source purple chi. Shining this thing. Lone Moon turned to look at a certain person out of habit. But he found that there was no one behind him. There was no familiar figure. Holy shit, where are they? Did she have to disconnect at every critical moment? Hong Meng also seemed to have just realized that Shin Ying and Chef who had been following behind him were gone. He paused. The purple chi just now was too thick and we got separated from them. Shit. Lone Moon really wanted to curse now. But a strong wind swept past in front of him, with an aura that seemed to destroy everything. Lone Moon turned his hand. The fan in his hand instantly turned into a long sword. He picked up Hong Meng beside him and flashed to the side. Screw it. He could only attack now. Fortunately, although this beast of chaos was powerful, its movements were very slow. It was not completely without a fighting chance. My lord. Hong Meng was a little unsteady. The chaos chi that the huge beast brought could directly corrode the god power in his body. Get lost, don't get in the way. Lone Moon finished speaking and threw Hong Meng out like a ball. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.